Tonight we begin with the incredible story of ancient Chinese innovation. We're diving into a world where genius wasn't just a spark, but a slow, steady burn that lit up the centuries and fundamentally changed our world. Imagine the feel of coarse, wet mulberry bark under your fingers, the sharp, earthy scent of pulp vats steaming in a humid workshop, and the quiet, determined scratch of a bamboo stylus on a strip of wood, the sound of a civilization straining against the limits of memory itself. Picture the distant, rhythmic thud of a pestle, grinding a mysterious black powder in an alchemist's quiet courtyard, and feel the cool, sure spin of a lodestone spoon on a polished bronze plate, pointing the way to uncharted horizons. You can almost taste the metallic tang of innovation in the air, a mix of sweat, ink, and infinite possibility. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just opened your eyes in the Yellow River Valley, sometime around 2000 BCE. The good news, you're standing at the birthplace of one of the longest, most continuous civilizations in human history. The bad news, literally everything needs to be invented from scratch. Your bed, if you're lucky, is a packed earth platform. Your calendar is the sun and the moon, and your most advanced piece of technology is probably a slightly sharper than average rock, tied to a stick. Welcome to the ground floor. But look around. There's something in the water, in the soil, in the very air here. A sense of order, of observation, of a people not just trying to survive the chaos of nature, but to understand it, to document it, to bend it to their will with a quiet, stubborn patience that would become their signature. This isn't a story of random eureka moments shouted in bathtubs. This is a story of systemic, cumulative genius, passed down like a sacred heirloom from one generation of scholars, craftsmen, and yes, even bureaucrats to the next. Because when your empire is vast, when your rivers flood with biblical regularity, and when you have to keep track of taxes, harvests, and celestial omens for millions of people, you don't just need smart people. You need systems. You need inventions. You are living in a society that is about to become an innovation factory, and you don't even know it yet. The first thing you'd notice, after the dust and the smell of millet porridge, is the sheer scale of the problems. This is a land of epic geography and epic challenges. The Yellow River isn't just a river, it's a temperamental, silt-choked god that giveth fertile land and taketh away entire villages with a single muddy breath. Controlling it isn't a public works project. It's a matter of life and death on a colossal scale. This is where it begins. The need to manage water leads to the first great school of Chinese engineering, hydraulics. You'll see teams of laborers, thousands of them, moving earth with wicker baskets and sheer human muscle, building dikes and digging canals. It's backbreaking, monotonous, and frankly, it looks like something out of a particularly grim dream. But in this grueling work lies a fundamental insight that humanity can, through organization and applied intelligence, reshape the very land to its advantage. This is the primal scene of Chinese invention. It's not glamorous. It's mud and calluses and communal effort. It is the understanding that the biggest leaps forward often start with the most basic needs, not flooding, eating, and knowing what day it is. And knowing what day it is crucial, because while those laborers are moving mountains of dirt up in the quiet courtyards of the early dynastic courts, another kind of invention is taking shape, one that deals not with earth but with time and the heavens. You see scribes, their faces lit by the glow of oil lamps, meticulously noting the movements of the stars. They are creating the world's first astronomical calendars. Their tools are simple, maybe a gnomon, a stick in the ground, to track the sun's shadow. But their ambition is cosmic. They are mapping the rhythms of the universe, trying to find order in the celestial dance above, to impose order on the chaotic human world below. Why? Because if you know when the seasons will turn, you know when to plant. If you know when to plant, you avoid famine. If you avoid famine, your civilization doesn't collapse. It's that simple and that profound. This marriage of the practical and the philosophical is the secret sauce. It's the DNA of Chinese ingenuity. The scholar and the farmer aren't opposites. They are two parts of the same organism, both striving for harmony, for a balance between humanity and the natural world. This principle, which the Chinese would later call the Tao, or the Way, isn't just spiritual mumbo-jumbo. It's a practical guide for living and, as it turns out, for inventing. You work with the flow of nature, not against it. You seek the path of least resistance that leads to the greatest result. It's why their inventions often feel so elegant, so right. They aren't fighting the universe, they're listening to it. And now, let's talk about the engine of all this progress, the world's first professional civil service. Imagine a society where the most powerful people aren't necessarily the ones with the biggest armies or the oldest family names, but the ones who scored the highest on a really, really hard test. By the time of the Han Dynasty, around 200 BCE, China had perfected a system of meritocratic bureaucracy that would make any modern HR department weep with envy. Young men, and it was almost always men, would spend years, sometimes decades, memorizing classical texts, mastering calligraphy, and studying philosophy, all for a shot at a government job. This created a ruling class that was, by definition, educated, literate, and obsessed with record-keeping. These weren't warlords, they were administrators. And what do administrators need? They need paper, they need accurate maps, they need standardized weights and measures, they need reliable communication across thousands of miles. The entire imperial machinery was a giant humming demand signal for innovation. A local magistrate in a far-flung province needs to report a crop failure. That's a problem waiting for a solution. The emperor wants to know the exact grain stores in every warehouse in the empire. That's an invention in the making. The need to coordinate, to tax, to census, to rule, it all created a relentless pressure to come up with better tools, better systems, better ideas. It was innovation driven not by the profit motive, but by the governance motive, and it was terrifyingly effective. But let's not romanticize it too much. For the average person, this golden age of early innovation probably felt a lot like, well, a lot of hard work. You're a farmer. Your life is dictated by the seasons, the soil, and the tax collector. The great inventions trickling down from the imperial courts might seem abstract, distant. A new bronze plowshare? Great if you can afford it. A more accurate calendar? Wonderful. Now you know exactly how many days you have left to harvest before the first frost. The reality of life for most was a constant grinding focus on survival. The grandeur of the dynasties was built on the backs of millions of anonymous calloused hands. The silk that would later stun the Romans, the porcelain that would be worth its weight in gold, the tea that would become a global obsession. It all started here, in the quiet, unending labor of people who simply needed to get through the day. And yet in that struggle, they too were inventors. They invented better ways to terrace a hill, to ferment a sauce, to weave a basket, to tell a story. The ingenuity wasn't just top-down. It was bubbling up from the bottom, from the everyday problems of everyday life. This is the fertile ground, the cultural petri dish, where everything we're going to talk about, the paper, the printing, the gunpowder, the compass, will eventually grow. It's a culture that values scholarship, order and patience. A culture that sees a problem not as a barrier, but as a puzzle to be solved, collectively, over generations. It's a culture that is about to give the world gifts it didn't even know it needed. And it all starts with something seemingly mundane, something we throw away without a second thought today, something that would begin with a pile of rags, some tree bark, and a really, really good idea. Continuing on from that world of administrative headaches and cosmic observations, we arrive at the invention that would solve the biggest problem of all: memory itself. From the heavy, clumsy bamboo slats and expensive silk scrolls of the early dynasties, a revolution was brewing, one that would begin, like so many great things, with what people considered trash. So you're an imperial clerk in the Eastern Han dynasty, around 105 CE. Your job is to record everything: tax quotas, celestial events, legal disputes, the emperor's dinner menu. And your writing surface? If you're lucky, it's a bundle of bamboo slips. Each slip holds a handful of characters. A decent report requires a small cart to carry it. There's a famous story that a scholar of this era needed 2 ox carts just to transport his personal library. That's not a library. That's a logistics nightmare. If you're slightly more fortunate, you write on silk. It's light, it's smooth, it's beautiful. It's also astronomically expensive, the equivalent of writing your grocery list on a sheet of solid gold. So you do what bureaucrats everywhere do. You complain. You grumble about your aching back from carrying bamboo. You sigh over the cost of silk, and you dream of something better. And in the midst of this collective, low-grade stationary despair, a court eunuch named Kai Lun has a thought. A brilliant, heretical, world-changing thought. What if we could make something new? Not from rare worms or sturdy trees, but from the stuff nobody wants? The true genius of paper isn't just its existence, it's the sheer, breathtaking audacity of its ingredients. Lun and his team looked at old rags, discarded fishing nets, frayed hemp ropes, and the stringy inner bark of mulberry trees, the literal detritus of daily life, and saw not garbage, but potential. They saw a future where knowledge wasn't a burden to be carried, but a feather that could travel on the wind. The process they perfected, a recipe so valuable it would be a state secret for centuries, was a form of alchemy far more impactful than turning lead into gold. It was turning rubbish into revolution. Step 1. Gathering the raw, humiliating materials. This isn't a clean process. You're not walking through a perfume garden picking petals. You're knee-deep in a pile of what amounts to ancient laundry, the kind that's been worn through, torn and sweat-stained beyond repair. The smell is potent, a mix of old human, old fish, and general decay. You take this magnificent mess and you wash it. Then you boil it for hours in huge vats of water mixed with wood ash or lime, creating a caustic soup that breaks down the tough fibers. The air fills with a steamy chemical stink that burns your nostrils. The smell of transformation. What emerges is a pulpy, grey, mushy sludge. It looks like something you desperately avoid stepping in. But this is the magic mud. This is the primordial ooze from which civilization will leap forward. Now for the artistry. A craftsman dips a rectangular wooden frame, strung with a fine mesh of bamboo threads or woven cloth, into this vat of grey goo. With a practiced, graceful motion, he lifts it, shaking it gently from side to side. The water drains through the mesh, and what's left is a thin, trembling, perfectly even layer of wet fibre. It looks hopelessly fragile. A sneeze could destroy it, but in that trembling sheet is the ghost of every book, every map, every love letter, and every bureaucratic form yet to come. The sheet is then carefully tipped onto a felt cloth. Another is placed on top and another, building a stack of damp paper and felt like a weird, historical layered cake. This stack then goes under a press, a giant screw press made of wood, and is squeezed with immense force. You can hear the wood groaning and see water streaming out as the fibers are crushed together, beginning to bond. The final step is to peel these damp, now coherent sheets and stick them onto heated walls, often made of brick or stone, to dry. The room is a sauna of hope, filled with the warm, slightly sour smell of drying fiber. And when it's done, when it's peeled from the wall, you have it. Paper. It's not white. Not yet. It's a rough, off-white, tan color. It might have bits and imperfections, but it's flat, it's flexible, it's strong enough to write on. And most importantly, it's cheap. The impact is difficult to overstate. Imagine the first time a scholar picks up a sheet of this new material. He dips his brush, and the ink doesn't bleed uncontrollably like on rough wood, nor does it sit on the surface like on slick silk. It is absorbed just enough. The brush glides, the characters form with a crispness and clarity that was previously impossible. For the first time, thought has a nearly perfect physical vessel. The bureaucracy, once choked by its own records, can now breathe. Decrees can be copied and sent to every corner of the empire without requiring a caravan. Poetry can be written, shared and preserved, not as a monumental effort, but as a casual act. Knowledge begins to escape the heavy bamboo cages it was trapped in. But here's the thing about a revolution. It's often slow, and it's almost always resisted. The old guard, the traditionalists, they sneered. They called it rag paper. They said it was vulgar, common, unfit for the lofty thoughts of scholars and the sacred words of classics. Writing on trash, unthinkable. They clung to their silk and their bamboo, symbols of status and tradition. For a while, paper was the underdog, the cheap alternative, the thing you used for rough drafts or packaging goods. But quality improved. The paper makers, these unsung chemical engineers of the ancient world, kept tinkering. They experimented with different ratios of hemp to mulberry bark. They found that adding starch could make it smoother, that using different drying techniques could affect its texture. Slowly, steadily, the rag paper stopped being cheap and started being good. Then it started being better than good. It became superior. The very thing that made it seem vulgar, its humble origins, became its greatest strength. Because it was made from a tangled web of different fibers, it was incredibly durable. A silk scroll could tear, a bamboo slip could split. But a sheet of good handmade paper, you could fold it, roll it, get it slightly damp and it would spring back. It was resilient, just like the civilization that created it. And then, the final barrier broke. The emperors and the most elite scholars themselves started using it. When the court endorses your trash, it's not trash anymore. It's technology. It's culture. Paper began to weave itself into the very fabric of daily life in a way few inventions ever have. It wasn't just for books and decrees. It was for money, the world's first paper currency, a concept so abstract and brilliant it would boggle minds centuries later. It was for wallpaper, for lanterns, for windows, for umbrellas, for toilet paper. A luxury the rest of the world would take over 1,000 more years to appreciate. It became the background hum of civilization. A poet could capture a fleeting feeling on a sheet and slip it into his sleeve. A general could unfold a detailed map that didn't weigh as much as a shield. A merchant could keep ledgers that didn't fill a warehouse. The world got lighter, faster, more connected, all because someone looked at a pile of old rags and saw a blank page waiting for a story. And the most incredible part, this technology, this state secret, would take 500 years to travel the Silk Road to the Islamic world, and another 400 to reach Europe. For almost a millennium, China held a monopoly on one of the most empowering technologies in human history. They didn't just invent paper, they lived in a paper world, while everyone else was still carving in stone. They had a head start on the future that we are still, in many ways, catching up to today. From the quiet miracle of paper comes a louder, more disruptive revolution. Because once you have something to write on, The next logical, maddening question is, how do you write on all of it without wearing your hand down to a nub? The answer would arrive not with a shout, but with the steady, rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a mallet on wood, a sound that would eventually echo through history. So paper is everywhere now. It's cheap, it's durable, it's perfect. There's just one catastrophic problem. Every single word, every character, every book, every government circular has to be copied by hand. Imagine it. A single copy of a Buddhist sutra could take a dedicated scribe months of painstaking, eye-straining work. His entire world shrunk down to the tip of a brush, the consistency of ink, the fear of a single mistake that could ruin weeks of labor. Monasteries are full of these men, their backs permanently curved, their fingers stained with ink, their lives dedicated to replication. It's a bottleneck, a massive civilization-wide traffic jam of information. Knowledge exists, but it can't move. It's trapped in single, fragile copies like birds in gilded cages. Then sometime during the Tang dynasty, around the 7th century, someone, we don't even know their name, has another one of those brilliantly simple heretical thoughts. What if we didn't copy the words? What if we copied the page? The birth of printing isn't a single eureka moment. It's an evolution, a slow dawning. It starts with seals, stone or bronze stamps dipped in ink and pressed onto paper to mark ownership or authority. Then it evolves to stone rubbings, where paper is pressed onto an inscribed stone tablet and rubbed with charcoal, transferring the text. You can almost see the gears turning in some anonymous artisan's head. If we can transfer text from stone, why not from wood? And so woodblock printing is born. The process is deceptively simple, a kind of brutal carpentry meets high art. A scribe first writes the text in perfect mirror image onto a thin sheet of paper. This itself is a skill that could break your brain. Then this paper is pasted face down onto a smoothly planed block of wood. Pear or jujube wood was preferred for its fine, hard grain. The carver then takes a set of fine, razor-sharp knives and begins the meticulous, nerve-wracking work of cutting away everything that isn't a character. He doesn't carve the characters themselves. He carves the space around them. He leaves the text standing in relief. One slip, one misplaced cut, and the entire block representing days or weeks of work is ruined. The sound of this work is a soft, persistent scratching, like a mouse gnawing at the foundations of ignorance. When it's finished, you have a solid page, frozen in wood. The block is inked with a brush dipped in a thick soot-based ink. Then a sheet of paper is laid carefully on top. A dry brush is used to rub the back of the paper, pressing it into the inked characters, and then the magic. You peel the paper back, and there it is, not a copy but a duplicate, a perfect twin of the original page. And the block can be inked again, and again, and again. You could make 100 copies in the time it took a scribe to make one. You could make 1,000. The first things to be printed in bulk are what you'd expect: Buddhist texts and charms. Picture a pilgrim, traveling for weeks to a temple, able to buy a printed prayer or a protective charm for a few coins. For the first time, the sacred is democratized. It's no longer locked away in a monastery. It's in your pocket. Then comes the money. Paper money printed by the state floods the economy. It's a concept so advanced, so abstract, that it requires this technology to even exist. You can't have a fiat currency without a way to mass-produce the fiats. But the real game-changer is what happens next. By the Song dynasty, in the 10th and 11th centuries, the government starts printing everything. The Confucian classics, medical texts, agricultural manuals, calendars, star charts. They establish massive state-run printing offices. Knowledge explodes. A scholar no longer has to travel to a single great library to read a rare text. He can own a copy. He can compare different copies. He can argue. He can annotate. He can build upon the work of others. The entire intellectual landscape of China shifts. It becomes flatter, more accessible, more dynamic. It's the world's first information revolution. But woodblock printing has a flaw, a beautiful, elegant, but ultimately limiting flaw. Each block is one page, forever. Want to print a different book? You have to carve an entire new set of blocks, correct a typo. Nearly impossible. It's rigid. And then, in the 1040s, a commoner named Bi Sheng looks at this system and thinks, we can do better. His invention is so ahead of its time, it's almost heartbreaking. Movable type. He carves individual characters onto small, identical cubes of baked clay. Then he fits them into an iron frame set on an iron plate, arranging them to form a page. He props the plate near a fire to melt a resin-based glue that holds them fast. He prints. And then, the best part, he heats the plate again. The glue melts, and the type can be reused, rearranged. It's the ultimate flexibility. The concept is genius. Pure, unadulterated genius. So why didn't it take over the world immediately? Why did woodblock printing remain dominant in China for centuries? The answer is language. The Chinese written language isn't an alphabet of 26 letters. It's a universe of tens of thousands of unique characters. A basic printing set needed at least 3,000 different pieces of type, and a comprehensive one could require 40,000 or more. The storage, organization, and retrieval of these pieces was a logistical nightmare. Finding the right character in a chest containing thousands of nearly identical little clay cubes could take longer than carving a new woodblock. The system was brilliant, but it was fighting against the sheer, beautiful, cumbersome weight of its own culture's written tradition. Woodblock, for all its inflexibility, was perfectly suited to a language where each page was a unique artwork. So, movable type became a fascinating footnote. A technology that demonstrated immense ingenuity, but didn't quite fit the world it was born into. It would be the Koreans, and later the Europeans, with their small, manageable alphabets, who would fully run with Bi Sheng's revolutionary idea. But that doesn't diminish the achievement. The Chinese had invented the two fundamental principles of all printing, the fixed block and the movable piece. They had created the tools to mass-produce thought. The sound of the mallet tapping the paper onto the inked woodblock is the sound of the end of the Dark Ages everywhere, even if the rest of the world didn't know it yet. It's the sound of a single idea, finally, being able to speak to millions. From the orderly world of printed words, we now turn to a discovery that was anything but orderly. An invention born not from bureaucracy, but from a much more ancient and mysterious pursuit, the quest for eternity. The story of gunpowder begins not on the battlefield, but in a quiet, smoke-filled room where a Taoist alchemist is trying very, very hard not to die. The scene is a Tang Dynasty laboratory around the 9th century. It doesn't look like a lab. It's more like a chaotic apothecary's garden shed crossed with a mystic's den. There are crucibles of all sizes, mortars and pestles stained with unidentifiable colors, and bundles of strange herbs hanging from the rafters. The air is thick with the smells of sulfur, sharp and volcanic like a struck match, saltpeter dug from the earth near old latrines, and the faint metallic tang of various ores. The alchemist isn't a soldier or an engineer. He's a scholar of the natural world, a mystic, a proto-chemist. His goal is noble, even beautiful, to find the elixir of life, a potion that will grant immortality. He works from ancient texts, mixing and heating anything he can get his hands on, guided by theory and a hefty dose of hope. He's trying to replicate the legendary pill of immortality. And in one of these experiments, he combines sulfur, saltpeter, which we now know as potassium nitrate, and a carbon source, maybe honey, maybe charcoal. He grinds them together into a fine powder. Then, likely while trying to heat the mixture in a crucible to purify it, something goes terribly, wonderfully right. There's a flash, A sudden violent whoosh of flame and smoke, a cloud of acrid yellow-grey fumes fills the room. The crucible might be shattered. The alchemist's eyebrows are probably significantly less bushy than they were a moment ago. He hasn't found immortality, far from it. He has just created the first known gunpowder, or as it was initially called, huoyao, the fire drug. The irony is almost too perfect. In searching for the secret to endless life, they stumbled upon a formula for immense, instantaneous destruction. For a long time, that's exactly what it was. A curiosity, a fascinating but dangerous trick. The earliest written recipe for gunpowder isn't in a military manual. It's in a Taoist text from 808 AD. Warning fellow alchemists to be careful with this mixture because it had a tendency to burn down their houses and scorch their hands. It was a pyrotechnic nuisance, a chemical prank that got out of hand. But the Chinese mind, ever practical, looked at this uncontrollable fire and saw potential. The first and most glorious application was, of course, entertainment. If you can make a powder go whoosh, you can make it go bang. And if you can make it go bang inside a sealed bamboo tube, you can make it go pop and send a tube shooting into the air. The birth of fireworks. Imagine the first festival where these were used. A dark, silent night, lit only by lanterns. Then, from the imperial grounds, a sharp hiss, a trail of sparks climbing into the blackness, and then a deafening crackle and a bloom of red and gold light against the stars. The crowd would have gasped, then roared. It was magic. It was the emperor demonstrating his power to command the very heavens, to create day from night. It was awe and beauty born from a failed immortality experiment. Fireworks became an instant obsession, a staple of celebrations, a way to scare away evil spirits with sheer, delightful noise and light. But you can't keep a good invention in a box, especially one that wants to explode. The military minds, always watching, saw past the pretty lights. They saw a shock weapon. The first guns weren't guns at all. They were fire lances. Picture a long spear. But attached to the shaft near the tip is a bamboo tube filled with that same gunpowder mixture. In battle, you point it at your enemy, or more likely their horse, and light a fuse. It wouldn't shoot a projectile, not really. It would unleash a terrifying blast of flame and smoke, a concentrated flamethrower that could reach several feet. The psychological effect alone would be devastating. Imagine facing a line of soldiers who could suddenly breathe fire. You wouldn't stick around to ask how it worked. Then came the projectiles. They started stuffing the tubes with not just powder, but also pebbles, broken porcelain, iron scraps, anything that would fly out with the expanding gases. The first true bullets were essentially garbage, launched on a wave of fire. These evolved into proper cannons, cast from bronze and iron. The earliest known cannon, from the early 13th century, is a heavy bronze tube called the Wu-Wei cannon. It's not sleek or elegant. It's a brutal, simple cylinder designed to hurl a stone or iron ball at a city wall. The sound it made would have been unlike anything heard on Earth before. A thunderclap created by man, a sound that announced the end of the age of castles and the beginning of the age of artillery. But here's the fascinating twist, the thing that separates the Chinese story of gunpowder from the one that would later unfold in Europe. In China, it never fully replaced the traditional arts of war. It became another tool in the toolbox, another unorthodox strategy in the vast Chinese military playbook. It was used for siege warfare, for naval battles, where rockets and bombs were launched from ships, and for signaling. But the core of the army, its philosophy and structure, remained rooted in discipline, massed infantry and cavalry. Gunpowder was the spectacular exception, not the rule. It was the ultimate expression of yin and yang, the same culture that produced the most delicate porcelain and serene landscape paintings also mastered the most destructive force on the planet. They harnessed fire, but they never let it consume them entirely. They used it to create beauty in the sky and to project power on the ground, but they never built an entire civilization around its destructive potential, not in the way others later would. The knowledge, like that of paper and printing, would eventually travel west along the Silk Road, where it would be refined, weaponized on an industrial scale, and then, centuries later, pointed right back at its birthplace. But in these early centuries, gunpowder remained a testament to a culture that could look into a crucible of failed immortality and see not just death, but also life, celebration, and a spectacular, earth-shattering light show. From the fiery, unpredictable drama of gunpowder, we now turn to an invention of quiet, unwavering certainty. While one discovery sought to tame fire, another was mastering an invisible force that would ultimately tame the seas themselves. A tool that began not as a navigational aid, but as a way to find harmony with the universe itself. The year is somewhere in the Han Dynasty, around the 2nd century BCE. You're not on a ship, you're in a serene courtyard or a geomancer's study. The problem at hand isn't how to cross an ocean, but how to build a house, place a tomb, or plan a city in perfect alignment with the cosmic order. The Chinese understanding of the world was deeply interconnected. The placement of human structures had to harmonize with the invisible currents of energy, the qi that flowed through the earth. To do this, they needed to understand direction, not as a relative concept, but as an absolute truth. And they found their truth in a most unlikely place, a strange, heavy stone that seemed to possess a kind of magic. Lodestone, a naturally magnetic mineral, often found as magnetite. Its property is bewildering. If you carve a piece of it into a smooth, polished shape, often a spoon-like form, and place it on a flat, polished bronze plate, it does something impossible. It moves on its own, without being pushed. It slowly, deliberately twists and settles, with the handle of the spoon invariably pointing toward the south. This is the south pointer, or Sinan, the ancestor of all compasses. The first time you see it happen, it feels less like science and more like sorcery, a piece of the earth, seemingly alive, telling you where you are in the cosmos. The bronze plate, itself a masterpiece of craftsmanship, is often engraved with the celestial animals and the trigrams of the I Ching, mapping the entire philosophy of the universe around this mysterious, spinning stone. The sound it makes is a faint, smooth hiss of polished stone on polished metal, the sound of certainty. For centuries, this is the compass's world, the realm of feng shui, geomancy. It's used by masters to determine the most auspicious sites for everything from palaces to graves, ensuring that buildings faced south to catch the benevolent yang energy and were protected from malign northern winds. It was a tool for creating order on earth that reflected the order in the heavens. But practicality, as always, has a way of whispering in the ear of philosophy. While the geomancers were aligning cities, another group of people were facing a much more immediate problem, not losing their way in the featureless grey expanse of the Gobi Desert. Desert traders, guiding their caravans along the Silk Road, began adopting a simpler, more robust version of the South Pointer. When the sun was hidden by dust storms and the stars were blotted out, this little magnetic spoon could tell them which way was south, keeping them on the path to the next oasis. It was a lifeline in a world of sand and disorientation. Then came the sailors, the real pioneers. Picture a Chinese junk, a massive, elegant wooden ship with bat-wing sails, venturing out of the relative safety of coastal waters and into the open South China Sea. The world becomes a terrifying and magnificent place, water in every direction. No landmarks, just the swell of the waves, the arc of the sky, and if you're unlucky, a dense, clinging fog that swallows everything. In these conditions, the ancient star-based navigation methods are useless. You are truly, utterly lost. This is where the compass undergoes its most important transformation. Sometime during the Song dynasty, 11th century, it leaps from the geomancer's bronze plate onto the ship's deck. The lodestone spoon is too delicate for the pitch and roll of a ship. So the sailors and inventors get clever. They discover they can stroke a thin iron needle with a lodestone, transferring the magnetic property to the needle, magnetizing it. Then they suspend this needle by a single strand of silk or float it on a reed in a bowl of water. And there it is again, that unwavering point to the south. In the middle of a heaving ocean, in the dead of night, in the heart of a fog bank, this little sliver of iron knows something you don't. It knows the way home. The psychological impact is impossible to overstate. It must have felt like having a god on board. This technology didn't just make navigation more accurate, it made it possible, period. It allowed for the age of great Chinese maritime exploration. It was the silent partner to the great Admiral Zheng He, whose massive treasure fleets of the 15th century sailed all the way to the coast of Africa. They could plot courses with a confidence that was previously unimaginable. Trade routes became more reliable, more direct. The compass helped stitch together the maritime half of the global trade network, from Southeast Asia to the Indian Ocean. And yet, in typical Chinese fashion, the compass never lost its philosophical soul. Even on a ship, it was more than a tool, it was a symbol. The captain and navigators would still have seen it as a link to the cosmic order, a piece of the Earth's deep magic guiding them through the chaotic, watery realm. It was a bridge between the profound stillness of the geomancy board and the dynamic chaos of the open ocean. The knowledge of the magnetized needle would, like paper and gunpowder, travel west. Arab traders likely encountered it in the Indian Ocean, and European sailors adopted it in the 12th or 13th century, where it would help enable their own age of exploration, and eventually their voyages to the very lands that had invented it. But the original, the Sinan, remains a thing of beauty and deep cultural significance. It wasn't just a pointer, it was a physical manifestation of a belief that the universe is orderly, knowable, and that humanity, with the right tools, can find its place within that grand, magnificent design. It was a promise, carved in stone and suspended on silk, that no matter how lost you are, there is always a direction home. From the certainty of the compass guiding ships across vast oceans, we turn to another invention that would travel even farther, not through force or navigation, but through sheer, irresistible desire. This is the story of a fabric so precious it would name the world's most famous trade route, a material born from one of nature's most unassuming creatures and turned into a tool of diplomacy, economics, and myth. The legend begins, as the best ones do, with an emperor, a cup of tea, and a very fortunate accident. The story goes that around 2700 BCE, the mythical Empress Lei Zhu was sitting in her garden beneath a mulberry tree when a cocoon from the branches above fell into her cup of hot water. As she watched, annoyed at first, the hot liquid began to soften the cocoon, and a fine, glistening thread started to unravel from it. Instead of fishing it out, she became fascinated. She carefully pulled and kept pulling, discovering that a single cocoon could yield an astonishingly long, continuous, and incredibly strong filament. That moment of curiosity, whether myth or history, would launch an industry that would define China for millennia. Because what Lei Zhu had stumbled upon was the secret of the silkworm, Bombyx mori, a caterpillar so thoroughly domesticated over thousands of years that it can no longer survive in the wild. It's a pudgy, off-white, and frankly, not very impressive-looking creature. Its entire existence is a cycle of eating mulberry leaves, growing, and then spinning a cocoon around itself using a single thread of raw silk, or brin, that can be over a kilometer long. The process of turning this cocoon into cloth, sericulture, is one of the most labor-intensive, delicate, and frankly bizarre processes ever perfected by humans. It begins in the mulberry groves. The sound is a constant, low, munching rustle, the sound of millions of caterpillars devouring leaves in darkened, temperature-controlled rearing houses. The smell is sharp and vegetal, the scent of mulberry leaves and caterpillar droppings. The women who tend them, for this was almost exclusively women's work, move with a hushed reverence. A loud noise, a draught, the smell of perfume or smoke could panic the delicate worms and ruin the crop. Their lives are dictated by the silkworm's cycle. When the worms are ready to spin, they are moved to trays filled with straw frames. And then the magic happens. Each worm, driven by instinct, begins to sway its head in a figure-8 pattern, extruding the liquid silk from 2 glands in its head. The liquid solidifies on contact with the air, forming the twin filaments of the cocoon. The sound is a faint, papery rustling, like the world's tiniest scribes writing in a language only they understand. After about a week, the cocoons are ready. But here's the brutal, necessary truth of silk. To get that perfect, unbroken thread, you cannot let the moth hatch. The emerging moth would secrete a fluid to dissolve the silk and break the filament. So, the cocoons are plunged into vats of boiling water. This kills the pupa inside and, crucially, softens the sericin, the natural gum that holds the cocoon together. Now the real work begins. In a room filled with steam and the faint, unpleasant smell of boiling insect, workers, again usually women, stand over the vats. Their hands move with incredible speed and dexterity. They use small brushes to find the loose ends of several cocoons floating in the water. They gather these ends, 5, 8, sometimes 10 filaments, and twist them together into a single, stronger thread, feeding it onto a reel. This is reeling. The thread they create is raw silk. It's yellowish and still coated in sericin. It feels stiff, not yet the soft, flowing fabric we imagine. The sound in the reeling room is the constant, gentle whir of the turning reels and the soft splash of hands in water. From there, the thread is washed, degummed, and then dyed using brilliant mineral-based pigments, deep indigos, vibrant cinnabar reds, and imperial yellows. Then comes the weaving. On massive, complex looms, weavers create the fabrics that would become legendary. There was plain weave, gauze, and the pinnacle of the art, brocade. Brocade was so intricate, with patterns of dragons, phoenixes, and clouds woven directly into the fabric, using additional weft threads that a single piece could take a weaver months to complete. The finished product, when it finally emerged, was unlike anything the world had ever seen. It was lightweight yet strong. It had a natural luster that caught the light in a way no other fabric could. It was cool against the skin in summer and warm in winter. To touch it was to touch luxury itself, and the Chinese guarded this secret with a ferocity usually reserved for military plans. The penalty for smuggling silkworm eggs or mulberry seeds out of the country was death. For centuries, they maintained a total monopoly. Silk became more than fabric. It became currency. Government officials were paid in bolts of silk. Taxes were collected in it. It was a symbol of status and power, so much so that sumptuary laws dictated who could wear what colors and patterns. The emperor and his court were draped in dragon-emblazoned brocades, while commoners, if they were lucky, might have a piece of plain silk for a special occasion. But secrets, especially ones as desirable as this, never stay secret forever. The demand for this soft gold created the Silk Road. It wasn't a single road, but a sprawling network of trade routes stretching from Xi'an to the Mediterranean. Camel caravans, laden with bolts of silk, would trek for months across deserts and mountains, facing bandits, extreme weather, and thirst. They weren't just carrying fabric, they were carrying the reputation of an empire. The Romans became obsessed with it. They called the Chinese the Seres, the people of silk. Roman writers like Pliny the Elder lamented the vast sums of gold and silver flowing east to pay for this translucent fabric that Roman matrons adored. He had no idea it came from a worm. He thought it grew on trees. This trade deficit was so concerning that the Roman Senate occasionally tried to ban silk as morally corrupting. It never worked. Desire always won. The secret finally leaked in the 6th century CE, as legend has it, by 2 Nestorian monks who smuggled silkworm eggs out of China in their hollowed-out walking staffs, presenting them to the Byzantine Emperor Justinian. But even then, Chinese silk remained the gold standard, the original and the best. For thousands of years, silk was China's ultimate soft power. It built fortunes, fueled exploration, and clothed the world's elite. It was a product of infinite patience, exquisite skill, and a secret pulled from a cup of tea, proving that sometimes the mightiest inventions aren't made of metal or gunpowder, but of the simplest, most delicate threads. From the delicate organic art of silk, we now journey into a world of gears, wheels, and ticking precision. A realm where Chinese engineers weren't just shaping materials, but were beginning to capture time itself and build machines that seemed to possess a life of their own. The problem of time in ancient China wasn't just about knowing when to have lunch. It was cosmic, bureaucratic, and deeply spiritual. The emperor, the son of heaven, had a sacred duty to maintain harmony between heaven and earth. His rituals, his pronouncements, even the timing of tax collections had to align with the celestial clockwork. A mistake in the calendar could throw the entire cosmic order, the mandate of heaven, into question. So while sundials and water clocks, clepsydra, existed in many ancient cultures, in China they weren't mere timekeepers. They were instruments of statecraft. The earliest clepsydra was simple, a bronze vessel with a small hole in the bottom, placed in a larger vessel of water. As water dripped out, the level dropped past marked lines on the inner wall, indicating the passing hours. The sound was a slow, monotonous drip, 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 the sound of empire being measured out in water drops. But simple wasn't good enough for the Tang and Song dynasties. Their bureaucracies were too vast, their astronomy too precise. They needed something better. They needed a clock that could not only keep time but display it, announce it, and model the very heavens. Enter the mechanical genius of the Middle Kingdom. The culmination of this quest arrived in 1092 CE during the Song dynasty, in the form of a structure that would have dwarfed and bewildered any European of the era, the astronomical clock tower designed by the brilliant polymath Su Song. Picture it, a tower over 30 feet tall, a pagoda of time. It isn't just a building with a clock, the building is the clock. It's a symphony of wood, bronze, and hydraulics. At its heart is the great water wheel, but this isn't a mill wheel for grinding grain. It's the engine of a celestial computer. The power comes from a constant flow water clock, a sophisticated system of tanks and siphons that ensures a perfectly steady stream of water pours into the buckets on the wheel. When a bucket fills to a precise weight, it trips a clever release mechanism, an early escapement, allowing the wheel to rotate just 1 bucket's worth, then lock again. Click. The sound isn't a tick-tock. It's the deep, wooden clunk of a massive gear engaging, followed by the gentle, endless rush of flowing water. This single, slow, mechanical heartbeat drives everything. And what does it drive? A celestial globe inside the tower, a bronze model of the stars that actually rotates in sync with the real night sky. Armillary rings, those elegant astronomical instruments for tracking planets that turn with the same deliberate grace. And most spectacularly, a procession of mannequins that emerge from behind carved doors on each floor. At the top, a figure in scholar's robes appears and strikes a bell. Bong. On the floor below, another figure strikes a drum. Thump. Another rings a gong. Clang. Each sound marks a unit of time, a quarter hour, an hour, a watch of the night. It's a mechanical orchestra conducting the day. The tower doesn't just tell you the time, it performs it for you. It makes time a sensory public spectacle. For the officials and astronomers who tended it, this was more than a machine, it was a miniature cosmos. By watching the bronze spheres turn and listening for the chimes, they could confirm that the universe was still in order, that the emperor was still in harmony with the heavens. It was theology, astronomy, and engineering fused into one breathtaking, water-powered engine. But the Chinese mechanical mind wasn't limited to timekeeping. While Su Song was building his tower, other engineers were solving terrestrial puzzles with equal brilliance. Take the south pointing chamber. No, not the compass. This was a chariot. A complex geared carriage, topped with a figure of a man, his arm perpetually outstretched, pointing south. No matter which way the chariot turned, no matter how it twisted and wound through a palace courtyard or a battlefield, the figure on top, through a system of differential gears that wouldn't be reinvented in the West for over 1,000 years, always unfailingly pointed south. It was a mechanical compass that didn't rely on lodestone. It was pure kinematics. The sound of it was the rumble of wooden wheels on stone, and the subtle, precise clicking of hidden gears doing impossible math. It was likely more a ceremonial wonder, a display of imperial technological supremacy than a practical navigation tool. But it proved a point, that the Chinese understood the principles of geared mechanics on a level that was simply staggering. Then there was the earthquake weathercock, invented by the genius Zhang Heng in 132 CE. This was a beautiful bronze urn, adorned with dragons and toads. Inside was a clever pendulum mechanism. When a distant earthquake sent tremors through the ground, the pendulum would swing, tripping a lever inside one of the dragons. That dragon would then open its mouth and drop a bronze ball into the waiting mouth of a toad sitting below with a loud clack. The direction from which the earthquake came was indicated by which dragon had released its ball. This device, the world's first seismoscope, didn't just detect quakes, it pointed to them. It turned an invisible, terrifying force of nature into an audible, visual event that could be measured and recorded. The court officials could then send aid to the affected region before messengers had even arrived. It was predictive governance powered by a pendulum in a pot. These machines, the clock tower, the pointing chariot, the seismoscope, they weren't just gadgets, they were philosophical statements. They expressed a deep-seated belief that the universe was orderly, mechanical, and knowable. That if you listened closely enough and built cleverly enough, you could hear the gears of heaven turning and build little models of them here on Earth. They represent a path not taken, a technological civilization that mastered precision mechanics, not for industrial production or warfare, but for cosmic understanding and bureaucratic harmony. The water in Su Song's clock tower eventually ran dry, the wood warped, and the gears fell silent. But for a glorious moment, in a tower in Kaifeng, time didn't just pass. It danced, it sang, and it pointed unerringly to the stars. From the whirring gears and celestial clocks of the imperial workshops, we descend to the foundation that made all that grandeur possible, the soil. Because before you can have philosophers contemplating the stars or engineers building clock towers, you need to solve a much more immediate problem: how to feed millions of people without starving to death. This is the story of how Chinese farmers turned agriculture from a desperate struggle into a sophisticated science. The scene is a field in the Yellow River Valley, sometime during the Han Dynasty. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth and the sharp green scent of millet. The sound is the constant rhythmic scrape of metal on stone and the labored breathing of men and oxen. You're looking at the single most important piece of technology in ancient China, one that would never appear in a treasure vault, but would determine the fate of empires, the iron ploughshare. But this isn't just any plough. While farmers in Europe were still struggling with wooden ards that scratched pathetically at the topsoil, Chinese metallurgists and farmers had collaborated to create something revolutionary. The quan, as it was called, wasn't symmetrical. It was a V-shaped iron share mounted on a sturdy wooden frame. But its genius was in the moldboard, a curved plate behind the share that didn't just dig into the earth, but actually sliced the sod and turned it over in a smooth, continuous motion. You can hear the difference. The European scratch plough goes scritch, 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 fighting the soil every inch of the way. The Chinese moldboard plough goes shrip, a clean, efficient sound of earth being neatly folded. This simple curvature did three miraculous things. First, it dug deeper, bringing more nutrients to the surface. Second, it created a better seedbed by breaking up clods. Third, and most importantly, it created drainage ditches between the rows as it turned the soil. In a land plagued by both floods and droughts, this was life insurance. The oxen pulling its strain against their yoke, but the plough moves with a determined, slicing purpose. It's the sound of efficiency being born, one furrow at a time. But a well-ploughed field is only the beginning. Now you have to plant. And here again, Chinese farmers showed a systematic mind that would make a modern factory manager proud. They didn't broadcast seeds, tossing them willy-nilly across the field, wasting most and creating a tangled mess of crops. No. They practiced row cultivation. Using a string line to keep everything straight, they planted individual seeds in carefully spaced rows. It looks obsessive. It looks like a form of agricultural OCD, but the benefits are enormous. Weeds are easier to spot and remove. Plants don't compete with each other for sunlight, and most brilliantly, it allows for intensive intercropping, planting fast-growing crops between the rows of slow-growing ones. You might plant wheat in rows and then plant soybeans between them. By the time the wheat is tall, the beans are already harvested. It's like getting two fields for the price of one. The field becomes a multi-story, multi-season engine of food production. And then comes the piece de résistance, the seed drill. Attached to the plough, it's a simple, elegant tube with a funnel at the top. As the plough cuts the furrow, a worker walks behind, dropping seeds into the funnel. They travel down the tube and are deposited at a precise depth and spacing into the freshly turned soil. No waste. Perfect placement. Optimal growing conditions. It's a technology that wouldn't become widespread in Europe until the 17th century. For over 1,000 years, Chinese farmers were planting with a precision the rest of the world could only dream of. The result of all this, land that could have supported one family could now support three. The agricultural surplus explodes. This is the hidden fuel for everything we've talked about so far. The silk industry needs mulberry groves. The paper makers need hemp and mulberry bark. The massive armies and the vast bureaucracies need to be fed. The cities can grow because the countryside is producing more than enough. This agricultural revolution is the silent, unglamorous partner to every flashy invention. But perhaps the most iconic image of Chinese agricultural ingenuity isn't on the land, but in the water. The square pallet chain pump. It sounds bureaucratic, but it's a thing of beautiful, practical simplicity. Picture a long wooden trough leading from a river or canal up to a higher field. Over a wheel at the top and under a wheel at the bottom runs a continuous chain of square wooden pallets. Now, here's the fun part. It's often powered by people. Not oxen, not water wheels, but people. They stand on a long, treadmill-like cylinder, a giant hamster wheel for humans, and they walk. The wheel turns, the chain of pallets moves, and each pallet scoops up a slug of water at the bottom and carries it to the top, where it tips into the trough and flows into the field. The sound is a rhythmic, squeaky thump, As the treadmill turns and the wooden pallets clatter through their cycle, it's backbreaking work. But it's also communal, rhythmic, and incredibly effective. It allows farmers to lift water over embankments and irrigate terraced fields on hillsides, turning previously unusable land into fertile gardens. It is agriculture as a collective effort, a human-powered machine solving a hydraulic problem. These innovations, the moldboard plough, row cultivation, the seed drill, the chain pump, they weren't invented in a court and handed down. They were developed in the fields by anonymous farmers who understood the land intimately and then refined and spread by observant officials who recognized a good idea when they saw one. They represent a different kind of genius than the clock tower or the seismoscope. It's a pragmatic, cumulative, dirt-under-the-fingernails genius. It's the genius of recognizing that the greatest empire isn't built on gold or silk, but on the ability to reliably, efficiently, and repeatedly pull food from the earth. Every bowl of rice, every steamed bun, every sip of millet wine in ancient China was a testament to this quiet, relentless agricultural revolution, the invention that fed all the others. From the fertile fields that fed the body, we turn to the ancient arts that sought to heal it. A world where medicine wasn't about fighting illness, but about restoring a delicate balance that connected the human body to the rhythms of the entire universe. This is healing that begins not with a pill, but with a philosophy. The scene is a quiet clinic during the Han Dynasty. The air smells of drying herbs, earthy mugwort, sharp ginger, the faintly sweet scent of licorice root hanging in bundled from the rafters. There are no stark white walls or metallic instruments. Instead, there are jars of dark, syrupy decoctions, bundles of fine silver needles, and a physician who listens not just to your symptoms, but to the pulse in your wrist, with a concentration so deep it feels like he's reading the tides of your very soul. This is the world of traditional Chinese medicine and its foundational text, the Huangdi Neijing, the Yellow Emperor's inner canon, written around the 2nd century BCE. It doesn't look like a medical text to modern eyes. It's a series of dialogues between the mythical Yellow Emperor and his ministers, discussing the flow of energy, the balance of elements, and the relationship between humanity and the cosmos. Because in this system, your body isn't a machine that sometimes breaks down. It's a miniature landscape, a microcosm of the natural world, and disease is what happens when the weather inside you goes wrong. The central concept is qi, pronounced chi, the vital life force that flows through everything, through the planets, through the rivers, and through invisible pathways in your body called meridians. Think of it as the body's version of the Yellow River. When it flows freely and powerfully, there is health and abundance. When it gets blocked, sluggish, or overflows its banks, there is pain, sickness, and dysfunction. The physician's job is to be a hydrological engineer for your inner landscape. The second pillar is the concept of yin and yang, the complementary opposites that make up the universe. Yin is cool, dark, passive, and substantial. Yang is warm, light, active, and energetic. Health is a perfect dynamic balance between the two. A fever? Too much yang. Chills and fatigue? Too much yin. A cough with yellow phlegm? Yang. A cough with clear, watery phlegm? Yin. Diagnosis is an art of subtle observation. The physician looks at your tongue. Its color, coating, and shape are a map to your internal organs. He listens to the quality of your voice and your breathing. But his master skill is taking your pulse. And he doesn't just take one pulse. He takes 3 on each wrist, at 2 different depths, feeling for 28 different qualities. Is it floating like a piece of wood on water? Sinking like a stone in a river? Wiry like a lute string? Slippery like pearls in a bowl? Each pulse tells a story about a different organ system and the state of your qi. It's a language of the body, spoken through the rhythm of blood. Now let's talk about the most famous export, acupuncture. The image of those fine needles can be intimidating, but in the ancient context it's anything but violent. The needles, made of silver or gold, are hair-thin. The goal isn't to pierce and prod, it's to connect and redirect. The theory is that by inserting a needle at a very specific point on a meridian, you can unblock a stagnation of qi, drain an excess, or tonify a deficiency. It's like tapping a pipe to clear a rust blockage or adjust the water pressure. The sensation isn't pain, it's a strange traveling feeling called dekhi, a numbness, a heaviness, a tingling that radiates along the meridian pathway, a sign that the qi has been reached and is moving again. The physician might twirl the needle gently or apply a small cone of burning mugwort to the end of it, a technique called moxibustion, the warm, herbal smoke infusing the point with healing warmth. The smell of moxa is pungent, smoky, and deeply comforting. It's the smell of focused heat chasing away cold and stagnation. Then there is the vast, breathtaking universe of herbal medicine. This is where the Chinese genius for categorization and experimentation truly shines. The Shenong Bengxiao Jing, the Divine Farmer's Materia Medica, catalogues 365 herbs, minerals and animal parts, classifying them by their taste, temperature, and the meridians they affect. It's a precision that would baffle a European herbalist of the same era. Herbs aren't just good for a cough. They are acrid and warm to disperse wind cold, or sweet and cool to moisten lung yin. A formula isn't a single herb. It's a complex recipe, a symphony of ingredients where each herb plays a role. The Jun Emperor herb targets the main problem. The Chen Minister herb assists the emperor. The Zuo assistant herb mitigates side effects or treats accompanying symptoms. The Shi messenger herb directs the formula to the right part of the body. A physician would gather these dried roots, barks and leaves, weighing them out on a small, delicate scale. He'd then boil them for hours in a ceramic pot, creating a dark, potent and often incredibly bitter tea. Drinking it is an act of faith, a belief that these elements from the earth can rebalance the elements within you, but it wasn't all energy and herbs. Chinese medicine had a remarkably practical side. They understood contagion centuries before germ theory. During smallpox outbreaks, they would isolate the sick. They practiced variolation, blowing powdered smallpox scabs up the nose of a healthy person to induce a mild case and confer immunity, a crude but effective precursor to vaccination. They developed sophisticated massage techniques, tui na, to manipulate muscles and sinews, and they certainly set bones and treated wounds using herbal poultices to reduce swelling and fight infection. Honey, known for its antibacterial properties, was a common wound dressing. Soap was made from natural saponins. This blend of the philosophical and the fiercely practical is what made the system so enduring. It saw the human not as a collection of parts, but as an integral whole, connected to the seasons, the emotions, and the stars. It was a medicine that asked not just, "What germ is this?" but "Why is this person in this place at this time out of balance?" It was and remains a profound invention, not of a single cure, but of an entire way of seeing health itself. From the inner landscapes of medicine, we now step outside to behold the physical ones, the monumental structures where Chinese engineering ambition met stone, earth, and sky. This is where philosophy became geography, where the desire for order, defense, and spiritual connection was carved directly into the bones of the land itself. The most obvious place to start is the one you can see from space, though that's a slight exaggeration. The sheer audacity of the idea is what matters. You're standing at a northern pass during the Qin dynasty, around 220 BCE. The wind whips dust into your eyes, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant mountains. The sound is a civilization-wide cacophony. The clang of metal on stone, the grunts of laborers, the creak of ropes hauling massive blocks. You are witnessing the birth of the Great Wall, or more accurately, the connecting of several older walls into one terrifyingly ambitious concept, a continuous barrier against the nomadic tribes of the steppe. But forget the pristine Mingara stone wall you're picturing. The original is a brutalist masterpiece of packed earth and rubble. Workers pour layers of gravel, soil and lime into wooden frames, then pound it with heavy rammers. Thud, thud, thud. The sound is a heartbeat of paranoia, a rhythm of defensive fear made physical. They're not just building a wall, they're building a border. They're drawing a line in the sand and saying, civilization ends here. The scale is incomprehensible. Thousands of workers, many of them conscripted soldiers and peasants, living in makeshift camps, their lives measured out in cubic feet of compacted earth. It's backbreaking, often fatal work, but the result is a serpentine ridge of tamped earth that slithers over hills and plunges into valleys, a raw, powerful statement of imperial will. It's not pretty, but it is profoundly effective. Watchtowers rise at regular intervals, and the sight of a signal fire blooming on one, then the next, and the next, is an ancient internet of smoke and flame, relaying messages across hundreds of miles in a single day. The wall isn't a static object. It's a nervous system for an empire, twitching at the slightest touch from the north. But Chinese architectural genius wasn't just about keeping people out. It was also about reaching for the heavens. Enter the pagoda. You see one rising from a sacred grove during the Tang dynasty. Its silhouette is instantly recognizable. The gracefully curved roofs tearing upward like a stack of parasols, each corner tipped with a small bell that tinkles softly in the wind. The sound is delicate, spiritual, a constant gentle reminder of the presence of a temple. A pagoda isn't just a tall building, it's a cosmological diagram in wood and brick. It represents Mount Meru, the axis of the Buddhist universe. The number of stories is always odd, symbolizing the male celestial yang principle. Climbing it is a symbolic journey toward enlightenment. The engineering is a quiet marvel. Unlike a solid stone tower, a pagoda is designed to be flexible, to sway with earthquakes and high winds. The complex system of interlocking wooden brackets, the dugong, is the secret. These brackets, fitted together without a single nail, absorb and dissipate seismic energy, allowing the structure to dance with the Earth's tremors rather than fight them. It's architecture that has learned to yield, to bend, and in doing so, to survive for over 1,000 years. Inside, the air is cool and smells of ancient timber and incense. Light filters through latticed windows, illuminating faded murals of bodhisattvas. It is a space designed not for living, but for contemplation, a ladder of wood pointing the soul toward nirvana. Then there are the structures you don't see, the ones that work in plain sight. The Grand Canal. Imagine a waterway so long it connects the yellow wheat fields of the north to the green rice paddies of the south. You're on its banks during the Sui dynasty, around 600 CE. The scale is, once again, borderline insane. It's not a river they're following, they're carving a river. Thousands of workers are digging a ditch that will eventually stretch over 100 miles. The sound is the endless scrape of shovels, the slosh of mud, the shouted orders of engineers. They are performing geographic surgery, stitching two different Chinas together with a thread of water. Locks, ingenious gated chambers that raise and lower boats between different water levels, are engineered with brilliant simplicity. A boat enters, the gates close behind it, and water is either let in or drained out until the boat floats level with the next section of the canal. The gates ahead open, and the journey continues. It's a liquid elevator, and it makes the entire canal system a continuous highway. The economic impact is immediate and profound. Grain, silk, timber, troops, everything that sustains the empire can now flow from the productive south to the political north without relying on treacherous sea routes or slow, bumpy overland carts. The Grand Canal becomes the empire's aorta, and the cities that sprout along its banks, like Yangzhou, become bustling, wealthy hubs. It is the ultimate infrastructure project, a testament to the belief that nature itself could be re-engineered for the state's convenience. And we can't forget the everyday architecture, the homes. The typical Chinese house, especially in the south, is built around a courtyard. You step through a modest front gate and enter a private world. The rooms face inward toward the central courtyard, not outward to the street. Privacy, family, and introspection are baked into the blueprint. The roof curves gracefully upward at the edges, like the corners of a scroll painting, designed to let good spirits flow upward and evil ones, who only travel in straight lines, to tumble off. The materials are simple: wood, brick, and ceramic tiles, but the effect is one of profound harmony. It is a microcosm of the Chinese worldview, ordered, balanced, and turned inward toward its own center. From the paranoid earthworks of the Great Wall to the spiritual ascent of the pagoda, from the economic engine of the Grand Canal to the peaceful introspection of a courtyard home, Chinese architecture was never just about shelter. It was always about an idea. It was the physical manifestation of a civilization that believed it could build order out of chaos, harmony out of conflict, and a home in the vast, unpredictable world. From the inner landscapes of medicine, we now step outside to behold the physical ones, the monumental structures where Chinese engineering ambition met stone, earth, and sky. This is where philosophy became geography, where the desire for order, defense, and spiritual connection was carved directly into the bones of the land itself. The most obvious place to start is the one you can see from space. Though that's a slight exaggeration, the sheer audacity of the idea is what matters. You're standing at a northern pass during the Qin dynasty, around 220 BCE. The wind whips dust into your eyes, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant mountains. The sound is a civilization-wide cacophony, the clang of metal on stone, the grunts of laborers, the creak of ropes hauling massive blocks. You are witnessing the birth of the Great Wall, or more accurately, the connecting of several older walls into one terrifyingly ambitious concept, a continuous barrier against the nomadic tribes of the steppe. But forget the pristine Mingara stone wall you're picturing. The original is a brutalist masterpiece of packed earth and rubble. Workers pour layers of gravel, soil and lime into wooden frames, then pound it with heavy rammers. Thud, thud, thud. The sound is a heartbeat of paranoia, a rhythm of defensive fear made physical. They're not just building a wall, they're building a border. They're drawing a line in the sand and saying, civilization ends here. The scale is incomprehensible. Thousands of workers, many of them conscripted soldiers and peasants, living in makeshift camps, their lives measured out in cubic feet of compacted earth. It's back-breaking, often fatal work, but the result is a serpentine ridge of tamped earth that slithers over hills and plunges into valleys, a raw, powerful statement of imperial will. It's not pretty, but it is profoundly effective. Watchtowers rise at regular intervals, and the sight of a signal fire blooming on one, then the next, and the next, is an ancient internet of smoke and flame, relaying messages across hundreds of miles in a single day. The wall isn't a static object. It's a nervous system for an empire, twitching at the slightest touch from the north. But Chinese architectural genius wasn't just about keeping people out. It was also about reaching for the heavens. Enter the pagoda. You see one rising from a sacred grove during the Tang dynasty. Its silhouette is instantly recognizable. the gracefully curved roofs tiering upward like a stack of parasols, each corner tipped with a small bell that tinkles softly in the wind. The sound is delicate, spiritual, a constant gentle reminder of the presence of a temple. A pagoda isn't just a tall building, it's a cosmological diagram in wood and brick. It represents Mount Meru, the axis of the Buddhist universe. The number of stories is always odd, symbolizing the male celestial yang principle. Climbing it is a symbolic journey toward enlightenment. The engineering is a quiet marvel. Unlike a solid stone tower, a pagoda is designed to be flexible, to sway with earthquakes and high winds. The complex system of interlocking wooden brackets, the dugong, is the secret. These brackets, fitted together without a single nail, absorb and dissipate seismic energy, allowing the structure to dance with the Earth's tremors rather than fight them. It's architecture that has learned to yield, to bend, and in doing so, to survive for over 1,000 years. Inside, the air is cool and smells of ancient timber and incense. Light filters through latticed windows, illuminating faded murals of bodhisattvas. It is a space designed not for living, but for contemplation, a ladder of wood pointing the soul toward nirvana. Then there are the structures you don't see, the ones that work in plain sight. The Grand Canal. Imagine a waterway so long it connects the yellow wheat fields of the north to the green rice paddies of the south. You're on its banks during the Sui dynasty, around 600 CE. The scale is, once again, borderline insane. It's not a river they're following, they're carving a river. Thousands of workers are digging a ditch that will eventually stretch over 100 miles. The sound is the endless scrape of shovels, the slosh of mud, the shouted orders of engineers. They are performing geographic surgery, stitching two different Chinas together with a thread of water. Locks, ingenious gated chambers that raise and lower boats between different water levels, are engineered with brilliant simplicity. A boat enters, the gates close behind it, and water is either let in or drained out until the boat floats level with the next section of the canal. The gates ahead open, and the journey continues. It's a liquid elevator, and it makes the entire canal system a continuous highway. The economic impact is immediate and profound. Grain, silk, timber, troops, everything that sustains the empire can now flow from the productive south to the political north without relying on treacherous sea routes or slow, bumpy overland carts. The Grand Canal becomes the empire's aorta, and the cities that sprout along its banks, like Yangzhou, become bustling, wealthy hubs. It is the ultimate infrastructure project, a testament to the belief that nature itself could be re-engineered for the state's convenience. And we can't forget the everyday architecture, the homes. The typical Chinese house, especially in the south, is built around a courtyard. You step through a modest front gate and enter a private world. The rooms face inward toward the central courtyard, not outward to the street. Privacy, family, and introspection are baked into the blueprint. The roof curves gracefully upward at the edges, like the corners of a scroll painting, designed to let good spirits flow upward and evil ones, who only travel in straight lines, to tumble off. The materials are simple: wood, brick, and ceramic tiles, but the effect is one of profound harmony. It is a microcosm of the Chinese worldview, ordered, balanced, and turned inward toward its own center. From the paranoid earthworks of the Great Wall to the spiritual ascent of the pagoda, from the economic engine of the Grand Canal to the peaceful introspection of a courtyard home, Chinese architecture was never just about shelter. It was always about an idea. It was the physical manifestation of a civilization that believed it could build order out of chaos, harmony out of conflict, and a home in the vast, unpredictable world. From the quiet tools that filled daily life, we now turn to the minds that imagined them, the scholars, scribes, and inventors who transformed curious thoughts into world-changing realities. because behind every ingenious invention stood a person, often anonymous, who looked at the world and dared to ask, what if we did this differently? Picture the imperial examination hall during the Song dynasty. The air is thick with the smell of ink and desperate ambition. Thousands of men sit in identical, cramped cubicles, hunched over paper, their brushes moving in frantic, silent devotion. The only sounds are the scratch of bristle on paper, the occasional soft groan of despair, and the distant footsteps of patrolling guards. This isn't just a test. It's a ritualized intellectual gauntlet, a years-long obsession that could lift a farmer's son to the highest ranks of power or condemn a brilliant mind to obscurity. These men are the engine of Chinese innovation. They've spent decades memorizing the Confucian classics, practicing calligraphy until their hands cramped, mastering poetry and statecraft. They are the definition of the educated elite. But here's the fascinating paradox. This system, for all its rigidity, created a bureaucracy of innovators. Because once you passed the exam, you weren't just a scholar, you were a government official. You were the local magistrate who had to solve flooding in your district. You were the commissioner who had to improve the grain yield. You were the administrator tasked with making the tax collection system more efficient. These weren't abstract academic problems. They were real, messy, urgent challenges that demanded practical, inventive solutions. The scholar, therefore, wasn't locked in an ivory tower. He was elbow-deep in the problems of empire, and his education gave him the tools to think systematically about solving them. Now let's put faces to this force. Take Kai Lun, the court eunuch who perfected paper. We've talked about his invention, but not about the man. He wasn't a traditional scholar. He was a political insider, a man who understood how the imperial court worked. He saw the problem of cumbersome bamboo records and expensive silk scrolls from within the bureaucracy itself. His genius wasn't just in the pulp recipe, it was in understanding the system well enough to know that his invention would be adopted if he presented it to the right people at the right time. He was an innovator, but also a savvy political operator. Then there's Bi Sheng, the commoner who invented movable type. We know almost nothing about him personally, and that's telling. He was likely an artisan, a craftsman working with his hands. His invention emerged not from the examination hall, but from the workshop. He looked at the laborious process of woodblock printing and thought there had to be a better way. His clay type was a solution born of practical experience, a hands-on fix to a problem that scholars who only used books might not even fully appreciate. His story reminds us that innovation in China wasn't always top-down. It bubbled up from the skilled, observant, and brilliantly practical minds of the working class. And we can't forget Su Song, the ultimate scholar official inventor. He was a diplomat, an astronomer, a cartographer, and a mechanical genius. His astronomical clock tower was the culmination of a lifetime of learning and observation. He represents the ideal, the educated man who could apply his vast knowledge to create something tangible and magnificent. He didn't just write poems about the stars. He built a machine that replicated their movements. He bridged the gap between philosophical contemplation and mechanical engineering. But for every famous name, there were thousands of anonymous contributors. The unknown alchemist who first mixed the gunpowder formula, the countless farmers who refined the moldboard plough through generations of trial and error, the silk weavers who developed increasingly complex looms, the metallurgists who perfected the composition of bronze for bells and mirrors. Innovation was a collective cultural project. It was embedded in the very way the society was organized. The imperial government itself often acted as a massive research and development department. It established workshops, funded projects, and compiled enormous encyclopedias of knowledge, like the Yongle Encyclopedia of the Ming Dynasty, which sought to capture all known information in one place. It was a system that, for all its flaws, recognized the value of knowledge and its practical application. Yet life for these thinkers was never easy. The pressure in the examination hall was immense. Failure could mean not just personal disgrace, but bringing shame to your entire family. Success meant a life of bureaucratic service, with its own minefields of court politics and imperial whims. An inventor like Zhang Heng, who created the seismoscope, had to navigate the treacherous waters of the Han court, where a misstep could be fatal. Their inventions were their legacy, but their daily lives were a balance of creativity and caution. The tools of their trade were simple but profound: the brush, the inkstone, the paper. The act of writing itself was considered a spiritual and intellectual discipline. A scholar's study was a sanctuary, a room with a simple desk, perhaps a vase with a single elegant branch, a scroll painting on the wall. It was a space designed for quiet contemplation, for the slow, deliberate work of thinking. The smell of ink and paper, the feel of the brush in hand, the sound of it moving across the page. These were the sensory experiences of innovation. It was in these quiet rooms that ideas were first sketched out, that problems were turned over in the mind, that the first inklings of a solution began to form. They were the architects of progress, drawing the blueprints for a better world, one careful brushstroke at a time. They prove that invention isn't just about sudden flashes of insight. It's often about the slow, steady accumulation of knowledge, the patient application of reason, and the courage to present a new idea to a world that may not be ready for it. They were the true heroes of the Chinese age of invention, not just the hands that built, but the minds that imagined. From the quiet studies where ideas were born, we now follow those ideas as they journey into the world, along dusty trails that would become the most famous trade network in history. Because inventions don't change the world by sitting in workshops. They change it by traveling, by being seen, desired and exchanged in the great marketplace of human civilization. You're a Sogdian merchant from Samarkand, standing at the Jade Gate, the western entrance to China during the Han Dynasty. The air is so dry it feels like it's sucking the moisture straight from your skin. The wind doesn't whisper, it howls, carrying stinging particles of sand that find their way into everything, your clothes, your food, your eyes. The sound is a constant low moan mixed with the jingle of camel bells, and the grunting of your Bactrian camels, those two-humped marvels of endurance who can smell water from miles away. Before you stretches the Taklamakan Desert. Its name, in the local tongue, literally means place of no return. You tighten the scarf over your face, check the ropes securing your cargo one last time, and take that first step into the void. This is the Silk Road. And it's not a single road. It's a network, a sprawling web of trails, mountain passes, and oasis towns connecting Chang'an to the Mediterranean. Your caravan might have 100 camels, maybe 500, each carrying up to 500 pounds of goods. But what are you actually carrying? Yes, there's silk, lots of it, but that's just the headline act. The real story is in the supporting cast. You're carrying lacquerware, so light and beautiful it seems impossible. You're carrying cinnamon, pepper, and ginger that will make Roman feasts explode with flavor. You're carrying paper, a curiosity that the Persians and Arabs will eventually go crazy for. And you're carrying something even more valuable: ideas. Tucked in your saddlebags, between bolts of silk and sacks of spices, are astronomical charts, medical texts, and mathematical concepts. You are a librarian on hooves, whether you know it or not. The journey is brutal, days between oases. The fear of bandits is constant. Your caravan travels with its own guards, armed with bows and the occasional early gunpowder weapon. At night, you huddle around fires made of dried camel dung, the smell pungent but welcome for its warmth. You stare up at stars so clear and bright they feel close enough to touch, and you use Chinese star charts to navigate, just as Chinese sailors use the compass you might have heard tales about. The oases are miracles. After weeks in the desert, you stumble into a place like Dunhuang, Suddenly, there's water. The sound changes from howling wind to the chatter of a dozen different languages, the bleating of sheep, the calls of merchants hawking their wares. The smell shifts from dust to roasting meat, fermenting grapes, and the incredible scent of fresh fruit. Here, at the crossroads of the world, you see things that boggle the mind. A Chinese official paying for supplies with a woven silk tapestry depicting a dragon. A Roman trader offering a delicate glass bowl, a material the Chinese find fascinating but haven't quite mastered. An Indian monk, his robes the color of saffron, discussing Buddhist scriptures with a Taoist scholar. This is where it happens. This is where the real trade occurs. It's not just goods changing hands, it's entire worldviews bumping into each other. The Chinese learn about Buddhism from those Indian monks. They hear tales of the Roman Empire from the few brave souls who've made the entire journey. They acquire new crops, cucumbers, walnuts, pomegranates, that will soon flourish in Chinese soil, and they give as much as they get. They demonstrate paper-making. They show off the first magnetic compasses. They let slip the formula for gunpowder, a secret that will take centuries to travel its full path, but starts its journey here, in the whispered conversations of a desert caravanserai. But let's be clear about the silk. It wasn't just a luxury, it was a strategic resource. For the Chinese state, it was a form of currency and a tool of diplomacy. They could pay off nomadic tribes along the border with bolts of silk instead of sending soldiers to die. They could create alliances by gifting it to foreign rulers. For the Romans, it became an obsession. Roman writers like Pliny the Elder complained about the massive trade deficit, the rivers of gold flowing east to pay for this translucent fabric that Roman matrons adored. The Roman Senate even tried to ban it, calling it morally decadent. It never worked. The demand was too strong, because silk wasn't just a fabric, it was a symbol. In Rome, it symbolized extreme wealth and connection to a mysterious, distant land. In China, it symbolized cultural superiority and the power of the emperor. It was soft power, literally woven from threads. And it wasn't just land. The maritime Silk Road flourished too. Picture a Chinese junk, its bat-wing sails catching the monsoon winds, sailing from Guangzhou to the Strait of Malacca. The hold is filled with porcelain, stacks of celadon green plates and bowls, each one wrapped in straw, their gentle clinking a constant soundtrack to the voyage. This porcelain is destined for the Swahili coast of Africa, for the palaces of Persian shahs, for the courts of Southeast Asian kings. It's tougher than local pottery, non-porous, beautiful. It becomes the Tupperware of the ancient world, and it's worth a fortune. On these ships, they also carry tea and the knowledge of how to brew it. They carry the compass, guiding them across featureless ocean. They carry the stern post rudder, a Chinese invention that gives them precise control over their massive ships in a way that Mediterranean side rudders never could. The impact of all this trade is incalculable. It's not an exaggeration to say the Silk Road built the modern world. It gave Europe noodles, which would eventually become pasta. It gave China grapes, which they would turn into wine. It spread Buddhism from India to China, Korea, and Japan. It transferred technology like paper-making and the compass westward, where they would fuel the Renaissance and the age of exploration. It was the original internet. A slow, physical, dangerous internet where data moved at the speed of a camel's walk. And the most incredible part, most of the people on the road never saw its entirety. You, the Sogdian merchant, might only travel from Samarkand to Chang'an and back. The Roman trader might only go as far as Persia. Goods and ideas were passed hand to hand, like a long, slow relay race across continents. You didn't need to know the final destination. You just had to make it to the next oasis, the next trading post, the next connection in a chain that stretched halfway around the world. The Silk Road was more than a route for luxury goods. It was the circulatory system of the ancient world, and the inventions of China were the rich, oxygenated blood that pulsed through it, vitalizing everything it touched. From the chaotic organic exchange of the Silk Road, we now enter the ordered, imposing world of the imperial court, where a single nod from the right person could launch technological revolutions or consign brilliant ideas to oblivion. Because in ancient China, innovation didn't just happen. It was often commissioned, curated and controlled by the ultimate client, the emperor himself. You're kneeling in the main throne room of the Forbidden City during the Ming Dynasty. The air is heavy with the scent of sandalwood incense and the faint metallic tang of fear. The floor is cold polished stone beneath your knees. In the distance, seated on the dragon throne, is the emperor. You don't look directly at him. That would be disrespectful enough to get you executed. You stare at the intricate patterns on the floor while your heart hammers against your ribs. This is the source. This is where the money, the mandate, and the manpower for grand projects originate. The relationship between the emperor and invention was complicated. On one hand, they were often the greatest patrons of science and technology the world has ever seen. On the other, they were unpredictable, mercurial, and their attention span could be terrifyingly short. Let's start with the good. Take Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor who unified China. He's infamous for burning books and burying scholars alive, sure. But he was also a standardization fanatic. He looked at his newly conquered empire and saw a mess. Different states had different widths for their cart axles, which meant their roads had different ruts. You couldn't drive a cart from one former state to another without breaking your wheels. So what did he do? He decreed a universal axle width. Overnight, the entire empire had a standardized transportation system. It was the ancient equivalent of mandating a universal charging cable for the entire world. He also standardized weights, measures, and most importantly, the writing system. This bureaucratic obsession with order, imposed from the very top, didn't just make administration easier, it made the rapid spread of technology possible. A blueprint for a new plough design drawn in the new standard script could be understood by a carpenter 1,000 miles away. That's the power of imperial fiat. Then there's Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty. He had a problem. The nomadic Xiongnu tribes to the north were a constant threat. He needed better horses for his cavalry, and he needed allies. So he sent an explorer, Zhang Qian, on a diplomatic mission to the west. The mission failed in its original goal, but Zhang Qian came back with something far more valuable: information. He described amazing horses from Fergana, grapes, alfalfa, and new crops. Emperor Wu, instead of being angry, was fascinated. He saw the potential. He actively encouraged trade and contact, effectively kickstarting the official Silk Road. His curiosity and strategic vision opened a channel that would fuel Chinese innovation for centuries, bringing in new ideas, new materials, and new problems to solve. The emperor's personal passions could also directly fuel specific technologies. Many emperors were obsessed with immortality. This wasn't a casual hobby, it was a full-time, state-sponsored research project. They funded legions of alchemists, giving them laboratories, resources, and a very strong incentive to not fail. Find me the elixir of life, or your life will be significantly shortened. It was under this intense life-or-death pressure that alchemists, while failing to find immortality, accidentally discovered gunpowder. The emperor's desire to live forever literally created the formula that would redefine warfare for the next millennium. The imperial workshops were the DARPA of the ancient world. These weren't sheds in a backyard, they were massive, state-funded manufacturing and research complexes. The finest craftsmen, artists, and engineers were conscripted to work there. They produced everything from the emperor's ritual bronzes to the latest astronomical instruments. If the emperor wanted a new, more accurate water clock, the workshops would build it. If he wanted a more efficient loom for imperial silks, they would invent it. The funding was essentially unlimited, and failure was not an option. This system produced breathtaking quality and innovation, but it also bound that innovation tightly to the court. The best minds weren't out in the public, starting businesses. They were locked in imperial compounds, working on projects to glorify the emperor. Some emperors were genuine nerds. Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty was a renowned patron of the arts and sciences. He expanded the examination system, actively seeking out talented men regardless of their family background. His court was a vibrant center of intellectual exchange. Then there was Empress Wu Zetian, the only woman to ever rule China as emperor in her own right. She was a massive patron of Buddhism and commissioned the construction of the Longmen Grottos, some of the most spectacular religious sculpture in Chinese history. She understood the power of art and architecture as propaganda, as a way to legitimize her unprecedented rule. But for every enlightened patron, there was a capricious tyrant. The same Emperor Qin Shi Huang, who standardized everything, also ordered the burning of all books that didn't align with his legalist philosophy. Countless historical records, philosophical texts, and technical manuals were lost forever. The knowledge contained in them, perhaps including inventions we'll never know about, went up in smoke. An emperor's paranoia could erase centuries of progress in a single decree. And then there was the sheer weight of tradition. An invention could be brilliant, it could be useful, but if it threatened the social order or seemed to disrespect the ancestors, it could be suppressed. Why change a perfect ritual vessel that has been used for 1,000 years? Why adopt a new farming technique if the old one was good enough for our glorious ancestors? This conservative streak, this reverence for the past, could stifle innovation as effectively as any book burning. The relationship was a double-edged sword. Imperial patronage provided the resources, the organization, and the demand to create wonders like Susong's clock tower or the Grand Canal. But it also meant that the direction of innovation was often dictated by the personal whims, fears, and hobbies of one man. It was a system of spectacular triumphs and equally spectacular and sometimes tragic limitations. The emperor was the sun around which all invention orbited. He could provide the light and warmth for ideas to grow, or he could burn them to a cinder without a second thought. The story of Chinese innovation is, in many ways, the story of navigating that powerful, unpredictable, and all-consuming gravitational pull. From the imperial courts where inventions were commissioned, we now enter the studios and scholars' gardens where they found their true voice, transforming from practical tools into the very instruments of cultural expression. Because the ultimate test of an invention isn't just what it does, but what it enables the human spirit to create. You're in a Song Dynasty scholar's studio, a room that feels more like a sanctuary than an office. The air smells of pine ink and the faint floral scent of the paper itself. Moonlight filters through the paper window, illuminating a single sheet waiting on the desk. This is where technology meets soul. Because without the inventions we've discussed, the breathtaking cultural flowering of ancient China, the poetry that still catches in your throat, the paintings that make you forget to breathe, would have been stillborn. Let's start with the most obvious partnership, the poet and his paper. Before paper, a poet's thoughts were trapped on clumsy bamboo or expensive silk. The act of writing was a physical struggle, but with paper, the brush meets the surface with a gentle whisper. The ink is absorbed just enough to bloom slightly, giving each character a soft, living edge. A poet like Li Bai, drunk on wine and moonlight, could dash off a verse about missing his hometown, the characters flowing across the page as fluidly as his thoughts. He could revise, he could crumple it up and start again. Paper made poetry spontaneous, personal and portable. A poem written in Chang'an could be copied and sent to a friend in Yangzhou who would feel the same pang of loneliness under the same moon. Paper turned private emotion into a shared cultural currency. Then there's the ink itself. This isn't just black liquid, it's alchemy. The best ink is made from pine soot, mixed with glue and painstakingly pounded into a solid cake. To use it, you grind the cake on an inkstone with a few drops of water. The sound is a soft, rhythmic, circular scrape, a meditation in itself. The scent of pine resin fills the air. The act of preparing the ink is the first step of composition, a ritual that clears the mind and focuses intention. The quality of the line, its depth and tone, depends on this grinding. A faint, dry line might express a delicate thought. A deep, rich, glossy black could convey profound gravity. The ink is a partner in the artistic conversation, and the brush, it's an extension of the body, made from wolf hair, rabbit hair, or bamboo. It's a spring-loaded marvel. Press down and the hairs spread, creating a bold, powerful stroke. Lift lightly and a hair-fine line trails off like a whisper. A master calligrapher doesn't write characters. He dances them onto the page. He breathes with each stroke. The brush, a simple bundle of hair and bamboo, becomes a conduit for the artist's very key, his vital energy. You can see the artist's mood in the handwriting. Frantic, calm, joyful, despondent. The invention of the flexible, responsive brush made calligraphy the highest art form because it made the inner state of the artist visible. Then came printing, and with it, the democratization of beauty. Before woodblocks, a beautiful book was a unique, priceless object. After, a middle-class scholar could own a printed copy of the classic of poetry or the Tao Te Ching, the characters crisp and uniform, the pages smelling faintly of ink and paper. He could study it, annotate it in the margins, and pass it down to his son. Printing didn't just spread words, it standardized beauty. It created a shared visual language of typography that every educated person could recognize and appreciate. And let's not forget what these tools did for painting. Chinese landscape painting isn't about reproducing a scene, it's about capturing its essence, its spirit. The inventions of paper and ink made this possible. An artist could take a sheet of paper, load his brush with wet ink, and with a few swift, spontaneous strokes, suggest a mountain shrouded in mist. The paper's absorbency creates the mist itself, the blurry, soft edges where the ink bleeds. This isn't a technical limitation, it's a feature. The tools themselves help create the atmosphere of emptiness and mystery that is central to Taoist and Buddhist thought. The painting isn't a window to the world, it's a door to a state of mind. And the inventions kept coming, each one adding a new color to the cultural palette. Porcelain provided the perfect canvas for cobalt blue landscapes, freezing scenes of pastoral life and myth on the surface of a bowl or vase. Lacquerware could be carved with intricate scenes from literature, the red and black layers creating stunning depth. The compass and advanced mathematics allowed for the precise architectural principles behind those graceful pagodas and covered bridges that seemed to float in the landscape, becoming subjects for paintings themselves. But the most profound impact was on the culture of the scholar himself. The four treasures of the study, the brush, ink, paper, and inkstone, weren't just tools, they were ritual objects. A scholar's identity was tied to his mastery of them. His studio was arranged according to feng shui principles to optimize creativity. He might have a qin, a zither, in the corner for music, and a go board for strategic contemplation. The inventions created an entire lifestyle, a cultural ecosystem dedicated to the cultivation of the self through art. This is the legacy that often gets overlooked. We remember the Great Wall and gunpowder, but it's the poem written on a piece of paper, the painting on a scroll, the calligraphy on a fan that truly encapsulate the Chinese spirit. These inventions gave that spirit a physical form that could survive wars, dynasties, and centuries. They allowed a culture to talk to itself, to refine its own self-image, and perhaps most importantly, to speak to us directly. Across 1,000 years. When we look at a Song dynasty landscape painting today, we're not just looking at a picture, We're seeing the result of paper that held ink in a specific way, a brush that responded to a master's touch. And a culture that believed the highest purpose of technology was not to conquer nature, but to learn how to paint its soul. From the sublime heights of art and poetry, we now descend into the murky swamps of misconception, where well-meaning stories and outright fabrications have tangled themselves around the truth of Chinese invention. Because for every genuine marvel, there's a stubborn myth waiting in the shadows, and it's time to clear the air with a healthy dose of historical reality. You're at a bustling medieval European fair, centuries after Marco Polo's travels. A merchant holds up a delicate porcelain vase. "Brought back from the mysterious East by the great explorer himself," he cries. The crowd oohs and ahs. The only problem? Marco Polo almost certainly never brought porcelain to Europe, and the Chinese had been perfecting it for over 1,000 years before he was even born. This is how myths begin, with a good story that's easier to swallow than the complicated, often collective truth. So let's grab our historical machetes and cut through the jungle of misinformation. First, the big one. Marco Polo brought pasta from China to Italy. It's a tale as comforting as a bowl of spaghetti and just as tangled. The story goes that Marco Polo discovered noodles in China in the 13th century and introduced them to a grateful Italy. It's a nice origin story for one of the world's most beloved foods. There's just one gaping hole in this narrative. We have concrete evidence of pasta-like dishes in Italy dating back to the Etruscans, centuries before Marco Polo was even a twinkle in his father's eye. A relief from an Etruscan tomb from the 4th century BCE shows what looks suspiciously like a rolling pin and a pasta cutter. Meanwhile, in China, noodles were indeed ancient. Archaeologists found a 4,000-year-old bowl of noodles perfectly preserved at the Lajia site. So what's the truth? Both cultures developed their own starch-based, stringy food products independently. The myth likely arose because Marco Polo did indeed remark upon the abundance and variety of noodles in China, and later Europeans, trying to make sense of his travels, simplified the story into a neat, false narrative of transmission. The reality is messier but more fascinating. Humanity, in its separate corners, just really loves carbs. Next up, the Chinese invented everything in isolation. This is the flip side of the Marco Polo myth, the idea of China as a completely sealed laboratory where genius sprouted with no outside influence. It's a comforting nationalistic narrative, but it ignores the vibrant, messy, two-way street of the Silk Road. Yes, the Chinese invented paper, printing and gunpowder, but they also absorbed and adapted ideas with voracious curiosity. Buddhism came from India and fundamentally reshaped Chinese philosophy, art and even language. The grapes and alfalfa that Emperor Wu so prized came from Central Asia. The chair, which eventually replaced the traditional kneeling mat, likely entered China from the West. Chinese innovation wasn't a bubble, it was a sponge. They took what was useful, refined it with their own unique genius, and made it distinctly Chinese. To believe they invented everything in a vacuum is to ignore their greatest strength, the ability to learn, adapt, and improve. Then there's the romanticized myth of the lone, starving inventor. The image of a solitary genius toiling in a dusty workshop, having a eureka moment that changes the world, is a very Western trope. In China, innovation was often a team sport, sponsored by the state. Bi Sheng and his movable type? We know almost nothing about him because he was likely an artisan, one cog in a vast machine of production. Kai Lun didn't invent paper alone in a shed. He oversaw a team of craftsmen and presented it as an achievement of the imperial court. The great astronomical clock tower was built by teams of engineers, mathematicians and craftsmen under Su Song's direction. The myth of the lone genius erases the collective, cumulative nature of Chinese progress, where improvements were made over generations, not in a single flash of light. Let's tackle a technical one. The Great Wall is a single, continuous wall you can see from space. Oh, this one is stubborn. First, the seen from space part has been repeatedly debunked by astronauts. From low Earth orbit, it's virtually impossible to see with the naked eye, no more than many other modern human structures. Second, and more importantly, it was never a single, continuous Ming Dynasty-style stone wall. It was a series of fortifications built over centuries, rammed earth walls from the Qin, packed rubble from the Han, and the iconic stone battlements from the Ming. There are huge gaps where mountains or rivers provided natural defenses. The wall is a system, a network, not a single line. Thinking of it as one continuous structure misses the strategic intelligence behind it. It was built pragmatically, not as a single monolithic vanity project. And then there's the myth of uniformity. Ancient China was a timeless, unchanging society. This is perhaps the most insidious myth of all. The image of a static, Oriental culture frozen for millennia is a fantasy. Chinese history is a roller coaster of wild innovation, brutal suppression, brilliant rediscovery, and constant change. The Qin dynasty burned books. The Han dynasty went on a collecting spree to save them. The Tang dynasty was incredibly cosmopolitan and open. The Ming dynasty later turned inward. The technology of the Song dynasty was, in many areas, more advanced than that of Renaissance Europe. To see it as one long, uninterrupted, identical culture is to miss the drama, the upheaval, the fierce debates, and the dynamic energy that actually fueled its inventions. They weren't robots following an ancient script. They were people, arguing, experimenting, failing, and sometimes miraculously succeeding. Finally, let's bust the myth of peaceful use. We often like to imagine ancient China as a land of wise philosophers who only used their inventions for benevolent purposes. But the same culture that produced the serene landscapes of Song painting also perfected gunpowder and used it in flamethrowers and bombs. The same administrators who prized poetry also used the crossbow, another Chinese invention by the way, to enforce their rule. This isn't a contradiction, it's a reflection of a complex civilization. They saw no disconnect between creating breathtaking beauty and developing terrifyingly effective weaponry. It was all part of the same drive to understand, control, and shape the world. So why do these myths persist? Because the truth is complicated. It's easier to remember Marco Polo brought pasta than to understand the parallel evolution of food technology. It's more dramatic to picture a lone genius than to acknowledge the slow, collective grind of progress. The real story of Chinese invention isn't a series of simple sound bites. It's a rich, complex, and often contradictory tapestry, woven with threads of brilliance, adaptation, bureaucracy, and yes, even violence. And frankly, that true story is far more interesting than any myth could ever be. From the tangled myths we've just cleared away, we now trace the actual paths these inventions took as they slipped beyond China's borders, a journey of whispers, accidents, and deliberate secrets that slowly leaked out to transform the entire world. Because the story of Chinese innovation doesn't end at the Great Wall, it's the story of how these ideas learned to walk, sail, and sometimes stumble their way into global consciousness. You're in a Baghdad paper mill in the 8th century. The air is humid and thick with the familiar smell of mulberry pulp and boiling water, a scent that should not be here, thousands of miles from China. Arab craftsmen who learned the secret from Chinese prisoners captured at the Battle of Talas in 751 CE are now meticulously recreating the process. The secret is out. Paper has escaped. This is the primary way Chinese technology spread, not through friendly cultural exchange, but through the brutal mechanics of war, conquest, and capture. The Chinese tried so hard to keep their secrets. The penalty for smuggling silkworm eggs was death. The composition of porcelain was a state secret. But secrets are slippery things. They travel in the minds of prisoners of war, like those papermakers taken to Samarkand. They hide in the memories of traders who observe just a little too closely. They sneak out in the cargo holds of ships that should have been carrying only spices. Let's follow the routes. The Overland Silk Road was the original information superhighway, but it was slow. A technology could take centuries to travel from Chang'an to Rome. Paper, invented in the 2nd century CE, didn't reach Europe until the 12th century, a 1,000-year journey. It moved in stages, like a relay race. From China to the Islamic world, where it was embraced and perfected, Baghdad had a street full of paper shops and book vendors by the 9th century. Then from the Islamic world to Spain and Sicily during the Moorish conquests. And finally, from there into the rest of Europe. Each culture that received it tweaked it, adapted it. The Arabs started using linen rags instead of mulberry bark, creating a stronger, more versatile paper. By the time it reached Italy, it was both recognizably the same invention and yet fundamentally transformed by its journey. Then there's the maritime route. The Indian Ocean was a liquid silk road, bustling with Arab dhows, Indian vessels, and massive Chinese junks. This is how the compass traveled. Arab and Persian sailors, navigating the vast, featureless expanse of the Indian Ocean, encountered Chinese traders using the magnetic needle. They saw its power immediately. The idea was so brilliant, so obviously useful, that it spread like wildfire among sailing communities. By the 12th century, Arab sailors were using a floating compass, a magnetized needle stuck in a reed and placed in a bowl of water. Mediterranean sailors picked it up from them, and by the time the Vikings were fading and the Portuguese were rising, the compass was a standard navigational tool enabling the very European age of exploration that would eventually lead them to China's doorstep. The irony is delicious, but not everything traveled intact. Sometimes it was the idea that spread, not the precise technology. Gunpowder is the classic example. The Chinese used it for centuries in bombs, rockets, and flamethrowers. The knowledge traveled west, likely with Mongol armies and along trade routes. But when it reached Europe, it encountered a different set of problems: stone castles. European engineers, facing the problem of breaching massive fortifications, took the basic formula and ran with it in a direction the Chinese never fully pursued: the metal-barreled cannon. They industrialized its production and turned it into the world's first true artillery. The Chinese invented gunpowder, but the Europeans, driven by their own unique geopolitical needs, perfected the gun. It's a pattern. The core invention is Chinese, but its most world-altering application often happens elsewhere. Then there are the inventions that were too culturally specific to travel well. Movable type, Bi-Sheng's brilliant clay blocks, is the saddest example. In a language with tens of thousands of characters, the system was cumbersome. But when the knowledge of it reached Korea, they saw its potential, and using a much smaller phonetic alphabet, created the world's first metal type. And when it finally filtered to Johannes Gutenberg in Mainz, Germany, with his 26-letter alphabet, it exploded, revolutionizing European society in a way it never could in its homeland. The invention was Chinese, but the printing press, as the world came to know it, was a European adaptation. Some things, however, the West just couldn't figure out. Porcelain was the ultimate white whale. For centuries, Europeans watched these magical, translucent, ringing thin but incredibly strong vessels arrive from the East. They called it white gold. They tried desperately to reverse engineer it. Alchemists and potters across Europe burned through fortunes trying to crack the code. They produced soft paste porcelain, a pathetic imitation that chipped easily and melted if you poured hot tea into it. They had no kaolin clay, and they didn't understand the high-temperature firing process. The secret remained locked in Jingdezhen until the early 18th century, when a German alchemist finally cracked it. For over 1,000 years, China held a monopoly on one of the most desired materials in the world. And then there were the quiet travelers, the inventions that slipped out almost unnoticed but changed daily life forever. The wheelbarrow, the sternpost rudder, the fishing reel, the belt drive, the iron plough. These humble, workmanlike technologies didn't have the glamour of silk or the drama of gunpowder, but they migrated slowly westward, making farms more productive, ships more maneuverable, and workshops more efficient. They were the unsung heroes of the technological transfer, the background code that upgraded European and eventually global civilization. The spread was never a simple gift. It was a process of leakage, theft, adaptation, and sometimes willful misunderstanding. The Chinese weren't trying to enlighten the world. They were trying to protect their advantages. The rest of the world wasn't passively receiving wisdom. They were actively stealing, experimenting, and repurposing. It was a messy, often uncredited, and centuries-long process of global collaboration that nobody at the time would have recognized as such. The compass that guided Vasco da Gama to India was a Chinese idea filtered through Arab hands. The paper that carried Martin Luther's 95 Theses was a Chinese invention, perfected by Islamic craftsmen. The gunpowder that shattered the walls of Constantinople was a Chinese formula, re-engineered by European engineers. We live in a world built on Chinese ideas, but we've forgotten the long, complicated journey they took to get to us. The true story isn't about China giving the world its inventions. It's about the world desperately, clumsily, and ingeniously figuring out how to take them. From the long, winding paths these inventions took across continents and centuries, we finally bring them home, to your home. Because this isn't just ancient history. It's the operating system of your modern world, running on code written in mulberry bark, magnetic stone, and alchemical fire. You're holding your smartphone. The glass is cool and smooth against your palm. You swipe and the screen lights up. That gesture, that expectation of instant connection, has its roots in a Yellow River Valley bureaucrat's desperate need for a better filing system. Look closer. The screen you're staring at. Its evolution begins with porcelain, that quest for a perfect, smooth, glass-like surface that the Chinese perfected while Europe was still eating off wooden plates. The very concept of a uniform, mass-producible object of stunning quality and complexity, that's a Jingdezhen innovation. Now open your browser. The page loads with text. The font, the layout, the very fact that you're reading standardized characters on a flat, bright surface. That's the ghost of paper and woodblock printing, smiling from the digital ether. You are, right now, swimming in a sea of information because a second-century eunuch looked at a pile of rags and saw a revolution. Let's get specific. Take the humble umbrella you might have tucked in a corner. That spring-loaded collapsible mechanism is a direct 2,000-year-old Chinese design. The sound it makes when it opens, that soft whump, is the same sound that echoed in Han Dynasty courtyards. Your cast-iron skillet? The wok's spiritual descendant, leveraging the same principles of even heat distribution that made stir-frying a quick, fuel-efficient miracle. The paper money in your wallet, or more likely the digital representation of it in your banking app, is a concept that boggled European minds for centuries. The Chinese weren't just using paper currency. They were living in a fiat economy, while the West was still weighing lumps of silver. And then there's the big one, navigation. You pull out your phone and open a Maps app. You tap a destination, and a blue dot appears, showing you exactly where you are on the planet. That blue dot is the great-great-grandchild of the lodestone spoon. The entire global positioning system, a network of satellites, exists to solve the same fundamental problem a Song Dynasty sailor faced in the South China Sea. Which way is it? The compass didn't just point north, it pointed to the future, a future where location is no longer a mystery, but a data point. The principles of gunpowder didn't just lead to fireworks and cannons, they led to rocketry. The same controlled explosive reaction that sent decorative blooms into the sky over Kaifeng now propels satellites into orbit and landers to Mars. The Chinese obsession with alchemy and transformation, the desire to change the very nature of matter, is the philosophical ancestor of modern chemistry and materials science. They were the original material scientists, experimenting with compounds and temperatures to create everything from durable paper to brilliant celadon glazes. But the legacy isn't just in the objects, it's in the ideas. The Chinese civil service exam, for all its flaws, was the world's first large-scale attempt at a meritocracy. The idea that a person's status could be determined by their performance on a test, rather than their birth, is a radical concept that underpins modern education and civil systems worldwide. The bureaucratic need to manage a vast empire, to take a census, to coordinate grain shipments, to standardize, created the world's first complex administrative states. You feel the echoes of this every time you fill out a tax form or get a license renewed. The Grand Canal is the ancient equivalent of the Internet, a network designed to move vital resources efficiently across vast distances. Our fiber optic cables are just the latest version of that waterway, carrying data instead of rice. And what about the things we're still trying to catch up on? Traditional Chinese medicines focus on holistic health, prevention, and the body as an interconnected system is now a multi-billion-dollar global industry. While Western medicine excels at acute crisis management, it's increasingly looking east for wisdom on long-term wellness, on understanding the patient as a whole person in an environment, not just a collection of symptoms. The ancient Chinese understanding of ecological balance, of working with nature rather than conquering it, as seen in their sophisticated irrigation and terracing, feels desperately relevant today as we face climate change. They were masters of sustainable engineering long before the word sustainable existed. So the next time you send a text, that's paper and printing. When you check the weather on an app, that's the legacy of astronomical calendars and a need to predict the seasons. When you take a pill for a headache, that's the descendant of herbal remedies tested over millennia. When you hear a siren in the distance, that's the great-great-grandchild of the signal fires on the Great Wall. We are living in a world they built, not the world of castles and knights that so often dominates our imagination, but the world of administration, communication, and daily comfort. The medieval European might not recognize your life, but a time-traveling scholar from the Song Dynasty would. He'd be baffled by the technology, sure, but he'd understand the society it created, a global, interconnected, paper-based, precision-obsessed civilization. He'd feel right at home. The most incredible invention of ancient China wasn't a single tool or substance, it was modernity itself. From the grand legacy that now shapes our entire world, we now turn away from the famous names and the imperial decrees to find the true source of innovation. In the dirt-stained hands and quiet observations of people history never bothered to write down. Because for every Kai Lun who presented paper to the court, there were 100 anonymous souls who first noticed how mulberry bark held together when wet. The air in the pottery workshop is thick with dust and heat. It's the 8th century, somewhere in the countryside near what will become Jingdezhen. A young apprentice, we don't know her name, is mixing clay. She's been doing this since she could walk, her hands permanently stained with the earth she works. Today, she adds a different kind of ash to the mixture, something she swept from the floor of the wood-burning kiln. It's an accident, a shortcut. She fires the piece expecting it to crack, but when she pulls it from the kiln, it has a subtle bluish tint it never had before. She doesn't know she's just stumbled upon a glaze formula that will be perfected over generations. She just knows it's pretty. She'll never be credited. Her name is lost. But her accident becomes part of the slow, cumulative genius of porcelain. This is how most invention actually worked. Not in a flash of lightning, but in 1,000 tiny sparks from people whose job was simply to get through the day. Think about the first farmer who looked at his crooked wooden plough and thought to tip it with a piece of scrap iron. He wasn't an imperial metallurgist. He was just tired of his plough breaking on rocky soil. He solved his problem. His neighbour saw it worked, and slowly, village by village, the iron ploughshare spread. No patents, no fame, just one less backache at the end of the day. Or consider the woman, always the women, processing silk. For centuries, the reeling of silk was women's work. In humid, steamy rooms, their hands moving with a speed that became unconscious, they'd find the ends of the cocoons and feed them onto reels. One day, one of them realizes that if she twists 5 threads together instead of 4, the resulting silk is stronger, less likely to snap on the loom. She doesn't write a paper, she just does it. The other women in the workshop see it, and they do it too. That small, unrecorded adjustment becomes standard practice, improving the quality of every bolt of silk that travels the Silk Road. These are the true inventors. The cooks who adjusted the shape of a pot until it became the wok, realizing the curved sides made tossing vegetables easier. The illiterate labourers building the Grand Canal, who devised a better way to brace the muddy walls of their excavations, preventing collapses that would have buried them alive. The anonymous alchemist's assistant, who, while cleaning a crucible, noticed that a certain mixture of salts made the fire burn brighter and longer, another tiny step toward gunpowder. They innovated not for glory, but for survival, for efficiency, for the simple human desire to make a hard job slightly easier. The system itself was designed to erase them. In a culture that revered scholars and looked down on manual labor, the work of hands was considered inferior to the work of the mind. A beautiful poem was worthy of record. The name of the carpenter who built the poet's desk was not. The imperial workshops were full of the finest craftsmen in the world, but they were conscripts, their labor belonging to the emperor. Their creations bore the emperor's mark, not their own. When Susong's magnificent clock tower was completed, the court historians recorded Susong's name. They did not record the names of the woodcarvers who shaped the intricate gears, the blacksmiths who forged the metal components, or the mathematicians who calculated the gear ratios. They were faceless, nameless cogs in the imperial machine. Even when we do have names, they're often just the tip of the spear. By Sheng and his movable type, we know his name only because a scholar, Shen Kuo, thought to write it down. But what about the potter who taught Bi Sheng how to fire clay? The calligrapher who showed him how to carve the mirror image characters? The countless others who tried and failed with different materials before he succeeded? They are shadows. This collective, anonymous genius is the bedrock of everything we've discussed. The Great Wall wasn't designed by one person. It was built by millions of conscripts who, through sheer repetition, figured out the most efficient way to pack earth, to set stone, to signal from one watchtower to the next. Their collective knowledge, born of sweat and desperation, is what actually made the wall stand. Papermaking, printing, gunpowder, these weren't solitary discoveries. They were cultural projects, refined over generations by people who never met, passing small improvements hand to hand, village to village, century to century. So tonight, as we near the end of our journey, let's pause to remember them. The woman in the field, the apprentice in the workshop, the laborer on the wall, the ones history forgot, They are the true foundation of the Chinese age of invention, not the emperors in their palaces, but the nameless, countless millions who, with every small solution to a daily problem, quietly, collectively, built the modern world. From the anonymous hands that shaped history, we arrive at our final destination. This isn't an ending, but a quiet moment to listen, to hear the echoes of ancient ingenuity still resonating in the hum of our modern world, and to understand what this long journey truly means for us today. Close your eyes, just for a moment. Listen past the fan's soft whir, past the distant traffic. Can you hear it? The faint, rhythmic drip of a water clock in a Han Dynasty observatory, the scratch of a bamboo stylus on wood, the sound of an idea being born against all odds, the gentle hiss of a lodestone spoon finding its true north on a bronze plate. These sounds are ghosts, but their vibrations never truly faded. They transformed. The drip of the water clock became the steady tick of a microprocessor. The scratch of the stylus became the tap of a keyboard. The hiss of the spoon became the silent digital calculation of a GPS satellite. We are living inside their echoes. This journey through Chinese invention hasn't just been a catalogue of clever gadgets. It's been the story of a different way of seeing the world, a philosophy made practical. While other civilizations were building monuments to gods and kings, ancient China was busy solving puzzles. The puzzle of memory, answered by paper. The puzzle of distance, answered by the compass. The puzzle of time, answered by the clockwork cosmos of Su Song's tower. They looked at chaos, a flooded river, a cumbersome bamboo record, a dark night at sea, and saw not a barrier, but a system waiting to be understood. Their genius was systemic. They didn't just invent things, they invented ways of doing things. Think about it. The civil service examination system was an invention for harvesting intelligence. The bureaucracy was an invention for managing complexity. The Silk Road was an invention for connecting entire systems. This is their most profound legacy, the idea that the world is knowable, manageable, and improvable. That human intellect, when applied with patience and collective effort, can impose order on chaos. But there's a warning in this story too. A lesson in the fragility of progress. The same culture that gave us paper and printing also, at times, burned books. The same system that funded astronomical research could, with a single imperial whim, dismantle an entire fleet, abandon a technology, and turn inward. The compass that guided Zheng He's treasure ships to Africa was later forgotten, the ships themselves left to rot, while Europe used that very same technology to sail to China's shores. Innovation is not a one-way street. It requires not just brilliance, but the will to sustain it, the courage to use it, and the wisdom to share it. The story of Chinese invention is also a story of what happens when that will falters. So what can we learn from them, here, now? In our age of frantic, disposable innovation, the ancient Chinese model offers a different rhythm. Theirs was the genius of patience. Paper wasn't perfected in a day. Porcelain wasn't a single eureka moment. These were centuries-long conversations between craftsmen, a slow, steady accumulation of tiny improvements. They understood that true progress is often a whisper, not a shout. It's in the farmer adjusting his plough, the weaver trying a new thread, the alchemist noting a strange flash in his crucible. It's cumulative, collective, and often infuriatingly slow. They teach us to look for solutions not just in breakthrough technologies, but in better systems, to value the administrator as much as the adventurer, to see the poetry in a well-organized ledger and the artistry in a smoothly functioning supply chain. Their world was interconnected long before the internet made it fashionable. They understood that an invention in agriculture could enable an explosion in art, that a new navigational tool could reshape global economics, that everything is connected. As we face our own chaotic puzzles, climate change, information overload, social fragmentation, perhaps their greatest invention is a mindset. A way of thinking that is practical yet philosophical, ambitious yet patient, individual yet deeply communal. It's the understanding that the biggest problems are rarely solved by lone geniuses, but by the quiet, persistent work of countless minds over generations. So as we dim the lights on this journey, take one last look around your room. The paper in that book, the porcelain of that mug, the magnetic principle in those speakers, the very concept of a standardized, mass-produced object. You are surrounded by their legacy. You are living in a world they imagined into existence. The ancient Chinese innovators don't just belong to history. They are our silent partners, the ghost in the machine of modern life. Their story is ultimately a hopeful one. It reminds us that human creativity is relentless, that from the humblest materials, mulberry bark, lodestone, clay, we can build civilizations. That curiosity, when coupled with persistence, can truly change the world. The final echo of their ingenuity isn't in a museum display case. It's in the simple, profound act of a problem solved, a question asked, a better way found. It's in us. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey. If you found this as fascinating as I did, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into the stories that shape our world. See you next time.